It doesn't even have a freaking stream key in it, and it still pops up like it's streaming. I've
That
literally.
frame rate is not the best.
All right. So it looks like everything's up and running. I've got. It says it's streaming on YouTube. All right. So it looks like everything's up and. Yeah, the audio's good on Rumble. Audio's good on YouTube. Freaking, I always hate Odyssey. Odyssey sucks. Well, no, I ain't gonna say that.
And that's a poor
It
frame
says
rate.
it's streaming on YouTube. Odyssey's
Okay,
good.
yeah, well,
Odyssey's audio's good. I actually like audio in some respects, or Odyssey in some respects, but like it's it's better than Rumble when it comes to having to hit refresh to see the video. But so we are good. Everything's streaming, and whenever we get it started, I'll hit record and record the actual episode. So, Julian, have you met Mark?
Don't think so.
Yeah.
How's it going?
Now you're
Okay, I
going.
know about
You're gonna be introduced to this guy now. Be careful. Here lately, he's been kind of rebellious. He doesn't want to listen. Like we've me and Bob Dub's been trying to keep him under control, but he won't do it.
Yeah.
I asked Bob Dub if she wants to be the timekeeper, and she's kind of debating on it because like she doesn't. Do you want to be the timekeeper, Bob Dub?
I could try and keep time.
Now, just
I don't have a dong. I need a gong to be a timekeeper.
Yeah, don't go for too long.
now.
I think I've got a client coming in 2 hours.
Okay.
now
Now the best thing to do, Bob Dub, is don't get on there and do like you said. Don't go on there and say shut your fucking mouth. You're dying.
Oh yeah, no. That was a joke. Shit. Okay. Thanks for that warning. I won't do that.
Yeah, people don't like hearing that kind of stuff, man.
They don't like my way. No.
And the family thing, right?
Don't need another internet freaking rumble going on like with old Mark and Bill Altman. You guys missed all that. He got into a rumble with him.
One of many.
This one was good though because Bill Altman started crying like a baby and stuff. He's like, you don't know what it feels like to do this and to do that.
Actually, I do.
Oh.
And I've done what he's... Well, I haven't been in specific areas based on that, and lots of what he's done during that moment.
He gets so riled up. Like, last time when we brought this up, his face turned all red and shit, and he... You remember? Yeah, he's like, well, I'll tell you what.
You see, remember, he's not dealing with the average user, he's dealing with somebody who's got a lot of experience in this industry.
When I heard that stuff, though, I was like, I knew, like, he was having a breakdown. He couldn't cope with it, and then he, like, tried to play it off like it was all fun and games and stuff. I knew he was fired up. He was...
I mentioned in the NCRI administration room that he...
Oh, he's in trouble. Oh, you actually came through. I thought you was gonna freeze up for sure.
Oh, yeah, he had my screen went blank for 2 seconds.
Sounds
Just power saving issue, box of moments, if you see power saving issue.
Sounds like your audio's coming together too. So, Now,
I did reduce the volume. So I was doing a few. Me and Mr. Will was just talking about this the other day, and I was doing a few tests, and I had the microphone volume boost up to something around 150%, and it sounded muffled like anything.
mhm.
So I reduced it back down to the standard 100%.
Now, when we get started, I think the best thing to do, since Julian's actually got a talking point, we can freaking start the rotation to where after I'm done, we can go to Julian, let him start up on New Zealand,
Yeah.
and then we can go freaking from there around. Well, I think Mark went first the last time, right? Or was that Otto?
Possibly. I can't remember.
So it comes back down to a full rotation. We'll have to start out with Julian, then we'll go to Bob Dub. We'll make Otto frickin' go last, since he's a troublemaker. We'll keep the rebels going last.
He sent me a message 10 minutes ago saying he's just got home. So I told him we're streaming. Hopefully he'll jump in sometime. And
Oh, Bob Dub, I'm so proud of you.
Roger, considering that this is an ongoing issue, would it be better next time to move this half an hour later?
Well,
it's tricky because he's about to start a job. So
Yeah.
he's got a couple more weeks where he can be with us, and then after that he might be. But I'm not quite sure how it's going to work out with him.
Yeah.
We can always rearrange
So-
this for the same time.
and to be fair,
Thanks.
this early amount of footage is actually good stuff. You know what I mean? Because this is before we get into the actual round table. Like, we've incorporated the whole system, format and everything. But this is where we can actually just kind of BS before we do it. So I like that. That kind of fits in with what we're doing. Because last year with me and Mark, it was just us two, and we were able to frickin' do this. And like, Mark is so wrong. He lives in England. He doesn't know anything about his own country, dude. Like, he doesn't.
Okay.
I'm a freaking American, dude, and I have to teach him shit. You know what I mean?
Americans are like that.
I mean, and like Tan, he doesn't even want to come in here because I'll just bust his ass on that Canadian stuff. Like, those Canadians are horrible. They're
But at least we have you, Roger, to put us all straight.
in Canada.
Yay, Americans!
I'm gonna tell you some new stuff I found out. Okay, conservatives in Canada are going to freaking gay pride freaking parades. What the fuck, dude? Seriously,
Oh,
conservatives.
they've got to show this to the political thing. They've got to kiss those babies. They've got to go to these things to see.
Well, they go to them. I'm talking conservative. You know what I'm saying? Like, what the heck is a conservative doing at a gay pride parade? Like, that's not.
Remember, even gay people are elected. They do put in the vote.
Not in the United States. We don't roll like that. Like, we don't have gay conservatives. And,
It's the same in New Zealand. The conservative politicians here go to it.
oh wow!
Yeah.
Like,
Like
that's
the National Party, like the main right-wing party, they all go to the pride parades.
see, that's crazy. And I found out Canada actually had to ban conservatives from going to their gay pride parades. Like, that's insane. I just. I'm like, what the heck is going on here? And then I found out, like, they're actually, like, we have red and blue. Red is conservative, blue is Democrat or liberal. And they have, like, purple, which, whatever that means, so.
Here it's the other way around. Like,
Yeah.
here red is socialist and blue is conservative.
That's what I heard, too. think Bob Dub told me that, didn't you?
I might have. I'm full
And
of
also-
all sorts of information.
Also, if you are a member of Conservative Party, it doesn't mean that you are fully right-wing conservative yourself. There are degrees.
Oh my goodness.
Same as if you are Labour
And we come back.
member, it doesn't mean that you are
We come back to the
Renegade.
socialism. Okay, certain degrees, and freaking you got to take a test to figure out what you are and what flavor of conservatism you have. That's all socialist bullshit.
Here you have far right libertarian parties as well that go to the pride parades.
I actually seen something on Minds that blew me away. I seen a freaking dude with a leather mask dressed like a freaking Nazi and masturbating on freaking webcam, dude. It was horrible.
What a wonderful thing to join the conversation of.
Welcome.
Bye, I'm out of here.
Okay. So we are here. Everybody go grab something to drink or smoke. I'm gonna go do a smoke break and everything, and then I will come back and we'll get it started, okay? Or you guys can hang out and just act ridiculous. Don't talk about Nazis and freaking...
Oh, Roger, you are so wicked.
Don't say Satan.
Not Satan, you sure? So, Otto,
Yeah.
Roger has asked me to keep time today.
Oh, good.
Yes, so I have a bell here. I have a thing here with a thing, which will go ding ding after 2 minutes. This will be a trial.
What we'll do is, we're also on the Minds chat, so I'll signal you when you're allowed to ring the bell for me.
Okay, that'll
Whenever I
work.
think anyone else is talking a little too long, we can always, make it a little shorter.
Right, so that you can fit in.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you see, you have to get the balance right, don't you?
There's always a royal road to these things.
You see, the nice thing about being a girl is that you get really used to being ignored. So guys can ask you to do jobs like timekeeping.
What did you say? I wasn't paying attention. Girl speaking? I didn't hear. I got something very interesting today. I went and visited my friend Fishgar, and he actually had some good ideas for some musical projects. But he wanted to go to an adventure over in Vermont, so I went with him. And I got something called lemon confetti cake, and it's put out by a guy who likes monarch butterflies. So every jar comes with a small container of milkweed seeds that you can plant and attract monarch butterflies.
What a cute idea.
Idea, yeah.
That's what Rush was saying to me the other day. That's nothing like what Rush was saying to me the other day. But when we were talking about NFTs the other day, Rush was saying that when you mint an NFT in your metadata, you can put a whole lot of links to like your artist statement or like a free bonus download or a portal to your gallery or something to your business web page. So in your NFT, when you give somebody an NFT, so we do a show like this, right?
Yeah.
And then because Julian's our guest, we give Julian, as we're doing it, we mint an NFT that's specific to this moment, and we give Julian that NFT as a commemoration of and a thank you to him for his appearance. And then on the show, on the NFT that we give him, we give him links to other things. And, that was another thing Rush said. We don't just give Julian one NFT. We give him, say, 10 NFTs.
Okay.
And encourage him to give them to his friends. You know, look, I did this interview and I was so cool. Here, listen to it.
Right.
And then with that NFT and with that portal into his work, then there's all these other links that go with the metadata. So that's like the milkweed seeds, isn't it? It's the.
It could be, yeah. Yeah, I can see the analogy there. Certainly. We speak
Yeah,
of
never understood why people valued just the NFTs as like an artwork, and they'd pay thousands of dollars for them back in the day. Like, you can do so much more with them, like you say, with the links, but you can also use them as like a token to say that you're a member of a club or something like that.
I like the idea that they contain information, you know, like those links and things like that. You could probably put store data in them, perhaps. I don't know, but
I mean, technically, you could do that with video format, image format. You can stick data into Excel tags, but not everybody's going to use them. I do have a problem with NFTs in the concept of artwork, because I just think it's a fad industry.
Yes, it is.
That will break.
Wasn't it an attempt, though, to like try to reproduce in the internet world the sort of genuineness you have with, like, say, an oil painting? Mm-hmm. I mean, in the old days, you would paint an oil painting, and maybe somebody would buy it, hang it in the gallery, might go into a museum, but there was only one. And the whole point was that only you could make that kind of painting. So when the digital world, suddenly came about, we could, you can make thousands, copies of it. I have all kinds of beautiful artworks digitalized that I can look at whenever I want. I post a lot of them.
That
so
right there, right?
NFT was an attempt to restore that genuineness.
We can use that as your talking point. Who brought that up?
Well, we were just all talking about NFTs. I think Bob did.
Mm-hmm.
Bob did.
No, it was you. Milkweed seeds.
Okay.
Don't put responsibility on me. I'll run away.
Use that in the episode, and we can use that as your talking point, because that's a good topic.
It's really relevant to this sort of.
Well.
Yeah.
I said bring your own talking points. Just because I'm bringing my talking point doesn't mean that's the entire freaking show encompassed.
I mean, this is more political oriented rather than that sort of subject, more tech talk.
Yeah, we could do it on Tech Talk, but okay. So let me get the recording started, and what we're going to do is I'm going to start it off, and then this time I'm going to pass it to Julian, since he's new and he's got an actual talking point, and we can go from there to Bob Dub, and then I'm debating on Otto or Mark, because I can't remember who went first last time.
It
was Mark, so Otto and then Mark.
Okay.
So here we go. 3, 2, 1. Now. Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Roger's Real-Time Talk Show event. I'm not for sure if I actually started it with event, but I sometimes have been using it in the words. But anyhow, today we have a friend here from another channel who is willing to join our insane crowd of panel, our panel. It's Julian Crawford. Now, Julian has been on Rumble quite a bit. Now, is that the only platform you stream on, Julian?
Mainly on Rumble. We've started streaming on X as well, so you can check out the Alternative Centre podcast if you can find it online.
All right.
Of course, we did a lot of shows with Bob a few months back, so you can look back at our archive as well. There's a lot of great content there.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I know, freaking, I've been watching it for a while. I seen that last one you did, and it was excellent. So if you guys want to know more about New Zealand and what's going on there, freaking, that's the channel to go to, because I've always loved watching you guys. I even mentioned it in your comment section, and I was serious about that. You guys do great stuff.
Oh, cheers, Roger. Appreciate it.
Now, with that being done, I'll just say that we do go according to a format, and I say it in every beginning. And what it is I'll come out with a talking point. After I come out with a talking point, we usually take 2 minutes, which nobody actually does. But I'll do a 2-minute talking point. I'll make my talking point, and I'll introduce it out. And what we'll do is have each person make a comment on what I'm discussing if they wish to. They have 2 minutes to comment, and then I can comment back, and then we go from that person to another person, and all the way around. And after we're done with that, it goes from me to Julian, and he freaking comes up with his talking points, and we get to comment each on what his talking point is, and he gets to respond to each of us. And then we do it so forth with the next person. So that's how we do it. We have had cross-talking, but I'm gonna be a hardcore person now, and I'm gonna be like, no cross-talking, guys. It's not a cool thing to do, so you need to respect one another. And everybody will freaking stop cross-talking because I'm so cool. Does that sound good?
Works every time.
Every time.
Every time. By doing this, I've got to say on the episode, I've said it in the stream already, but like, I'm really surprised that freaking Mark Edworthy has turned into such a rebel. Like, Otto has just corrupted him. He's freaking, those two are horrible. So with that, I'll open it up now. I've been going through freaking socialism in London, and I'm finally to the end of my talking points for it. I'm not going to get caught up in it too much after this, but I started out with the Second International, and I've worked up this far. And so far, what stuck out to me that was the craziest part about socialism in England was the fact that freaking first they started the their socialist parties, and it was all connected to what eventually became the Labour Party that England knows today. They had a First International, which was affiliated with the anarcho something, and they're supposed to be like the anarchists groups, but they split apart from them in the First International and created the Second International without them. Then you had socialist groups, which eventually started teaching socialism in kindergarten in England. That kind of blew my mind. Or not kindergarten, it was freaking Sunday schools. So they were teaching little kids freaking socialism in Sunday school. And they also started, well, you know about the school system today. If you don't know anything about it, it's in the school systems and stuff. But I also found out, I believe it was last week, that they actually founded their first communist party in England a year after freaking the Soviet Union was freaking formed with the Bolsheviks, wasn't it? 1 year after. So communism was prevalent in England as well. And now we're getting on to the 1928 policy conference with the Independent Labour Party, the ILP, and I'll read that. Okay, now the 1928 policy conferences. The ILP's response to the first Labour government was to devise its own program for government. Throughout 1928, the ILP developed a socialism in our time platform, largely formulated by H.N. Belsford, John A. Hobson, and Frank Wise. And here it is. The program consisted of 8 policies. The living wage incompletely applied, a substantial increase of the unemployment allowance, and then the nationalization of banking incompletely applied, the bulk purchase of raw materials, the bulk purchase of foodstuff, the nationalization of power, the nationalization of transport, and the nationalization of land. Okay, so of these 8 policies, the living wage, the unemployment allowance, nationalization of banking, and the bulk purchase of raw materials and foodstuffs were the chief concern of the ILP. The centerpiece of the ILP program was the living wage policy, which sought to impose high minimum wages across all industries and nationalize all private enterprises which could not afford to pay them in order to resolve interwar unemployment and poverty, which it held to be caused by underconsumption. Now that underconsumption thing is what sticks out to me, because a lot of things today, well, a lot of that sticks out to me, but a lot of people today, they're considered consumers, you know what I mean? And that's what these people want you to do. They want you to consume. It's not as important what you produce, it's what you consume that they're more concerned with, you know. But increasing the unemployment allowance and switching to bulk purchasing were to be done in the conventional way, but the method of paying the living wage differed from labor practices. The ILP criticized the continental method of paying wage allowances from employers' pools, which had been implemented in 1925 by Rice Davies. The ILP proposed to redistribute the national income, meeting the cost of the allowances by taxing higher income earners. Sound familiar? A nationalization of banking involved more significant changes to economic policy and had nothing in common with labor practices. The ILP proposed that once a labor government took office, it should hold an inquiry into the banking system that would prepare a detailed scheme for transferring the Bank of England to public control, revise the operation of the Bank Acts, and ensure that control of credits is exercised in the national interest and not in the interest of powerful financial groups. By making creditors shift entirely to checks and deflation practiced by the Treasury, checks and possibly getting rid of gold reserves. Okay, shifting entirely to CHEQUES, and possibly getting rid of gold reserves, thus ending the policy of deflation practiced by the Treasury and the Bank of England. Now, I've heard of inflation, and that word deflation is something that I'm not really too familiar with, so that's something that if you guys have any information on it, I'd love to hear it. Now it goes on for a little bit more. It says the labor leadership did not support the program. In particular, McDonald objected to the slogan "Socialism in our time," as he viewed socialism as a gradual process. For the duration of the second Labor government between 1929 and 1931, 37 Labor MPs were sponsored by the ILP, but none were appointed to the cabinet. Instead, the group provided the left opposition to the Labor leadership. In 1930, ILP conference decided that where their policies diverged from the Labor Party, their MPs should break the whip to support the ILP policy. So, I may have read that a little bit wrong. So, the two things that stick out to me in this is policy of deflation practiced by the Treasury and the Bank of England, and then also actually there's a couple things, and then this thing about handing land over to the state, that's something that was kind of concerning to me. Also, the banking practices, making it a public control, and taking any kind of powers away from powerful financial groups. You know, I'm not big on powerful financial groups, don't get me wrong, but I don't like the idea of it being a public freaking utility, you know what I mean? Like here in the United States, we have the FCC, you know, and if you know anybody in America, the FCC isn't anything that they like. Not too many people like it, so. And there's a couple of other things in here, but I think I should probably practice what I preach and keep it down to a 2-minute limit, and that was a lot of reading. So with that, if you guys have any comments on that, I'll open it up to Julian, see what his take is on it, and see what you think.
Isn't it amazing how they still talk about those same issues today? Like the living wage is a big campaign here in New Zealand, but people act like it's a brand new idea. But obviously they're just getting these ideas from the past when, like you say, the UK was moving heavily towards socialism. And of course New Zealand, where I live, is a former colony of the UK, so you know, there's the idea here that socialism is promoted as a good thing, even though people know communism is considered bad, but people think that somehow if you water it down to socialism, that it's going to be a great thing for everyone. And it also went hand in hand with the decline of the British Empire, because around that time they put out the Statute of Westminster, which essentially prevented the Parliament of the UK passing laws on behalf of these colony countries. So, it's like I say, people think that there's a big difference between socialism and communism, but as you mentioned, the Second Internationale, they all agreed, despite their differences in how they would achieve their goals, that they ultimately all share the same goal. So that's the Social Democrats, the Socialists and the Communists. They all have the same ultimate goal, but they disagree on how they want to achieve it. So, like you say, they want to do it gradually, a lot of them, whereas the Communists want to do it as a revolution that just happens instantly. So we've seen this gradual implementation of socialism, because then it's harder for people to oppose the changes because it's so incremental. And it wasn't until after World War II that New Zealand formally adopted the Statute of Westminster, and this is what really gave New Zealand its independence and ability, not entirely independent, but it gave itself a sovereign parliamentary ability to make its own laws.
That's pretty good. The thing that sticks out to me with what you just said is gradual, you know, and here in the United States everybody has this attitude like it's just the way it is, you know what I mean? This is the way it's always been. Why even say anything, you know? And the point that I'm making is, no, it hasn't always been this way all the time. It may have been incorporated back when your grandfather was a young man, but that doesn't make it like it always was, you know what I mean? These laws have been gradual, and they slowly developed over time, you know? And I'd also like to point out the fact that communism was written by the same man that created socialism. Karl Marx was the one who wrote the Communist Manifesto, you know what I mean? So I don't see a difference between communism and socialism, to be honest with you, other than the fact that there's vulgar communism where frickin' Stalin decided, like you said, that they wanted a revolution and they endorsed violence, whereas the original socialism wanted to do it peacefully. So with that, I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to let Bob Dub talk, because it's her turn.
Thank you. I think that it's so interesting. For me, it's a really fascinating thing that I'm developing in my thoughts, is something that Otto tuned me into. And that is that in our world, socialism and communism are two separate systems that operate to support, and there is actually socialism happening in every woman's home, where she tries to distribute the resources evenly to all her children, and her husband goes out and involves himself in the capitalist world and brings the money home for her to be able to do that. So for me, I'm trying to understand a way in my mind where we no longer have the election pendulum of 10 years or 8 years or whatever it is of capitalism followed by 8 years of socialism, where everybody undoes everybody's policies and messes up the whole system for the little guy. For me, I think that it's fascinating how these two systems, one which is a very masculine driven system and the other which is a very feminine organized way of thinking. I would like to be able to find a way where these two could cooperate, not in politics, but in daily life of humans. So that's kind of where I am with my thinking on this development. Is that I'm thinking towards the future. This past is fascinating, but how are we going to harness this knowledge to make integrated systems where everybody actually gets what they want and they don't have to wait for 10 years for their party to be in power over the others?
That it?
That's it.
Wow. Okay, so with me, the only thing I gotta say is I don't think that it's useful. I think that the whole system needs to be thrown out. Socialism needs to be abolished, and we need to come up with something new. I don't agree with socialism whatsoever. I don't think that it's a good thing. Every problem we had in the 20th century was related to socialism. Every single problem.
What?
Yes.
Roger.
Yes.
Roger.
Even World War II. See? So that's all I got to say on that. So now, after you, we're going to pass it over to Otto so that he can get rebellious and start. He's the rebel this week. He usually was bobbed up, but now him and Mark are the rebels.
I don't know how rebellious, but a lot of things I was taking notes. Unfortunately, let's work backwards from what Bob said. Yeah, and that's something that I've thought about for a while, and I've talked to Bob about it, is the fact that we talk about capitalism with a capital C, socialism with a capital S, as systems to control the entire economy and life of a nation, whereas these basically are derived from regular patterns of human behavior. It's natural for men to create wealth, and you create wealth, as an engineer friend of mine says, is you take a piece of metal and you make it more valuable by turning it into a valve. And that's creation of wealth. And women distribute wealth. Women share things. They have children. They have to take care of hubby. They're making sure grandma is tucked in at night. In the old extended family, it was sharing was very, very huge, more hugely obvious than it is today. And I always bring up that story as they were moving from feudalism into the bastard feudalism of the Elizabethan and Jacobean eras, where they refused a man a coat of arms because his gate was not greasy enough, he didn't share enough. So these things didn't have any economic theory behind them that was trying to force people into like one or the other pattern of behavior. I think people will naturally, move into these patterns if they're not, their lives are not otherwise distorted by governments that call themselves communists, which are usually the worst offenders, or for that matter, capitalists. Although you don't hear people going on about being capitalists so much anymore, although they did used to more. But one of the things that got me about communism, socialism, whatever you want to call the, attempt to redistribute the wealth by law and thus ultimately by force, was something Lenin said, and this really blew my mind when I first came across it. And basically, H.G. Wells was talking to Lenin. They were traveling on a train, and the point of the story was that H.G. Wells said to Lenin, "What if we really contacted aliens? It had to do with his, War of the Worlds book. And Lenin made this statement. He said, well, that would be a game changer, which, I'm sure that, it would be seen as that. But then he made this very interesting thing. He said, this would suddenly become, so incredibly important that he said violence would no longer be the most important way to drive human history. In other words, he basically said violence was the best way to help humanity. So, this is a philosophy predicated on violent overthrow. And again, with the communists we have around today, they're not like the good old the Stalinists, and before that the Marxist-Leninists. I knew old style Marxists, and they would laugh at a lot of this stuff. The thing is that a lot of even the way communism is presented has changed with time. It's become more politically correct and more ridiculous, really. When you look at this intersectional stuff and redefining the class struggle as a racial struggle or as a gender struggle, this is completely anathema to the Marxism I learned about when I was a little kid, where the whole point was that you ignored race and you ignored gender, and instead the struggle was against the bourgeoisie. These were the class enemies, the owners of the means of production and distribution, and the classes which support them. Every single one of those kids in college in Antifa, they're all class enemies. Every single one of them. Then they think they have no idea what communism really is. But this is getting like Polonius's beard. I wanted to bring up something too about deflation. And deflation, I'm not an expert, but one of the things that drove a lot of the fears of the capitalists at this time, they were scared shitless of what they called overproduction, because prices would drop and money would be worth more. And that would be great if you were like a poor worker, but to them, unless they could keep people buying stuff, they would have to cut back on their production. If they cut back on the production, they'd have to lay off more people. People wouldn't be able to afford to buy stuff, and so they'd have to lay off more people. And they saw this as a very dangerous thing to fall into. Their idea was that you would produce stuff and then pay people, and the people would go out and buy the stuff, and then you'd have to keep making more stuff, kind of like running downhill. And I guess they thought it would just go on forever as long as you kept making more babies and you didn't run out of room. And again, this is a very simplified. I am not in any way an economist, thank goodness. But yeah, deflation, I think, was part of something that they were very scared of. The idea of basically overproduction. And if the government was like deliberately going to introduce policies that would basically, it's like negative inflation. Your money becomes worth more. You can buy more stuff with it. And you kind of see that on an individual basis. I'm thinking of pocket calculators. If anyone here is old enough, or a few of us are, remember when pocket calculators first came out, and they were like little Texas Instrument box that had little LED lights you could barely see. It could add, subtract, multiply, and divide, and do square roots, and cost $100. And now you can get something that's basically a scientific calculator that they practically give it away with a carton of cigarettes or something. It's so that's deflation, if you like, in that particular thing. But they really were worried about overproduction, as they put it. That they kind of knew that this whole capitalist thing was sort of like a running downhill thing. If it ever had a burp, they just figured it could easily run in the other direction. So.
Yeah, I like your explanation on that, because it made me think of bank runs too. That was another thing that was a big issue with the banks. So I really appreciate you talking about deflation, because that's an issue that I always found. And like the gold standard, everybody like makes cracks and jokes about it now, when you bring up the gold standard, but now you look at money as being fiat, and that also is something that I think should be discussed.
Yeah, each has its point. People hate fractional reserve banking because when you explain it, it's, obviously it can seem like, hey, this is a ripoff. But at the same time, fractional reserve banking does fuel economic expansion up to a point. So all these things have their drawbacks and their advantages. The gold standard, that there's a lot of very positive things about a gold-backed currency. And in fact, I've been seeing a lot of articles, at least the headlines. I haven't read them. I'm not really into that economics. but I've been seeing more and more headlines talking about nudging back to the gold standard. Countries are actually thinking about this. It does have its advantages. And right now, I don't think they want, fiat and fractional reserve banking does drive a lot of economic activity. But right now, I think we're having too much economic activity and it's going in the wrong direction. So maybe they're thinking now we look to the advantages of the gold backed currency. But I don't know if they would ever go to that. But I think all these things, you got to look at them as they're pluses and minuses.
Okay, so now it's Mr. Wildman himself, Mr. Edworthy, Mark Edworthy's turn. So what do you got to say there, bud?
Okay, couple of points. First of all, I've got to correct you. You mentioned the FCC earlier when you were actually talking about the Security and Exchange Commission. You were talking about the Federal Communications Commission, one department. Socialism being compared to communism. This is an interesting point. I first point out this on previous articles. There are two forms of socialism. There's international socialism, globalist socialism, which we would generally call communism these days. And then there's the sort of national socialism, which was used by the Germans from 1920 to 1945. When you say socialism is related to communism, that's only partially so. There was a point about Marx creating socialism, and that's something I totally disagree with. This is related to more of the Adam Smith and John Locke argument of the nurture versus nature point. And this goes way back to, the 17th century. And as far as devolution is concerned, that's an interesting one when you consider the issues of that we saw in Europe during the 70s and 80s with things like the so-called milk mountains, where there was an oversupply of milk being enforced by those governments, and created a reduced profit for milk. So it's the sort of less than fair sort of economy footprint, where you've got the less amount of product and the more demand, the higher the price goes. The more amount of product, lower the price goes. One interesting thing about the milk mountains is that quite a few cheeses wouldn't even exist these days if it wasn't because of what happened in the 70s. Also, socialism and corporations. This is another form of, we've seen a third form of socialism these days, where it's more of a corporate socialism. So when it comes to things like the more cosmetic arguments, race, gender, colour, blood, a lot of these things are being pushed by corporations to try and produce this sort of inclusive and to allow them to sell the products or to make it fashionable for those products to be sold to demographics that in the past may not have purchased those products. So yeah, the idea of socialism just being a communist thing is, on the face of it, it sounds possible, but in reality, it's a wider scope. Yeah.
Well, with me, see, from what I've been learning about it is like with what you just said there, like that's the way your mind's been groomed. Okay, of course it's supposed to be complicated and more complicated because that is the way socialism is supposed to be. It's supposed to complicate things and make it more freaking about freaking this and that. They want to break it up. It's just like the name socialism, okay? It wasn't originally socialism. Like you mentioned John Locke and what was his name?
Adam Smith, yeah, John Locke and Adam Smith.
And what's his name over in France to Gaulle or whatever is.
Yeah.
But anyhow, you know, back then they called themselves realists. And like everybody today likes to run, well, I'm a realist, and not one of them really understands what they're calling themselves. You know what I'm saying? Being a realist is what started the age of romanticism, where people revolted against the realist ideas because they wanted to tell you that this is a fairy tale, this isn't true, you need to stop believing in this stuff, and you need to look at the real aspects of life. Well, that's when you started getting the age of romanticism, where frickin' they came out with the Brothers Grimm, who was talking about real issues, but turned it into a fairy tale, you know, like Hansel and Gretel. You know, that was inspired because people in Germany were abandoning their children in the woods, you know. But that was a reaction to the realist, and it evolved and it changed its names. It's just like now you like to use the term freaking globalist, okay, or the word progressive. Oh, I'm progressive. You know what that means? That means you're a freaking socialist. Period. That's what that means. That means you are a socialist. National socialism. Now, National Socialism is aimed towards people who are into the national idea. Frickin' that doesn't mean that they're less socialist than people who are frickin' just globalists, global nationalists, whatever you want to call it. They're all socialist in nature, okay? Now, like, when it comes to what you're talking about with corporations, that's where I think a lot of people overlook what freaking fascism really is, okay? And if you take a look at National Socialists like Adolf Hitler, and what made him a fascist state was the fact that he allied up with people like Krupp, who freaking ran the freaking factories and did the slave laborers with the Jews so that freaking they could produce freaking weapons, okay? Now that created a fascist state because they used socialist programs to freaking monopolize on, and that's how they created fascism. They used these socialist programs to create a freaking monopoly. So like here in the United States, we have prisons where these prisoners have to be fed. So of course people have to make bids on them, okay? And when they make bids on them, they have to have credentials in order to go in and frickin' cook food for them. So these people make bids, whereas people who frickin' know how to do the job but they don't have the credentials aren't able to frickin' do that job because they don't have the credentials. You see, that's actually a monopoly. And that's what they're doing. They're setting up monopolies. And that would technically be a fascist state. That would be a form of fascism. You know what I mean? So and like the EU, I know what you're getting at with the EU. I think the EU is 100% fascist. I don't care what anybody believes. I believe it's a fascist state, and that's what they're setting up. They're creating a fascist state out of it. So that's all I got to say on that.
Just a couple of points. Actually, one point I totally forgot to mention. I, in favour of term As I stated before, I am in favour of some forms of socialism, such as a national health service, compared to the US sort of insurance health service, which is fairly corrupt, to be fair. So the sort of form of health service that is free at the point of delivery, but is paid by taxes, I can see being only a good thing. When you talk about companies, the corporation and practicing, it is worth remembering that in the 20s and 30s, these German companies could only operate if they agreed with the governmental concepts. If you were a total outlier, then you wouldn't be able to work in Germany.
Yep, that's what they're doing now here in the United States.
Mm.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so now we are turning this over to Julian. You got your talking points, Julian?
Yeah, well, I agree with what you said about fascism and Nazism, because we hear all the time that these are supposed to be far-right ideologies, but as you point out, Nazism is National Socialism, which obviously you've mentioned the distinction between globalists and nationalists, and they certainly don't get along with each other to the same extent, but they're still promoting the state having that control over the corporations. So, like you say, fascism is when the state interferes and controls the running of private companies. And I wanted to just get back to Bob's point, where she's saying that socialism is like a mother distributing food to her children when the husband brings home the bacon. But I would see it more like the husband goes to work, brings home the bacon, and then your neighbour comes over and takes half of your food for free, and you can do nothing about it. So it's like a form of organised theft, and it's the real problem is that who do you put in charge of the decisions of whose money is going to be taken from whom and given to who? So you have the inefficiency of governments distributing wealth, and it can never really have the efficiency of the market mechanism, where the free market can set the price of goods and services based on supply and demand, whereas when socialist governments get involved, that can distort that mechanism. And there's the whole idea that if you tax the wealthy too much, then the entrepreneurs and the people who are actually coming up with the innovative ideas will simply stop turning up and running their businesses, stop providing employment to the workers if there's too much burden coming from the state. And also the point about going back and forward between socialism and capitalism, really we see this gradual move towards socialism called the dialectical materialism. So they're always trying to create the synthesis between the thesis and the antithesis. So the point where we are now would be the thesis, and then they're wanting to get towards communism. So they create the synthesis between the current system and the communist system to gradually move in that direction. And usually when you have a right-wing government come in, they don't actually reverse all of that. They may just maintain a lot of those previous left-wing policies. So we've never really seen a true capitalist society to really judge how well capitalism works, because you would have to remove the government's interference from the private economy. And as Bob mentions, women see socialism as compassionate. So we've seen, obviously, women got the vote in New Zealand before any other country, but we've seen that has resulted in an increase in support for socialism. and really there's been a social decline in society over that time. So, you know, you mentioned that, you know, communism was responsible for over 100 million deaths in the 20th century. So it's still kind of bizarre that people promote socialism as being so wonderful and communism being so terrible, but behind the scenes, many of them share the same aspirations.
Roger, what's
Okay.
happened to you?
Yeah, I'm here. I forgot that I didn't know for sure he was done talking, man. It was
Oh, yeah.
good stuff, man. That was really good. Now, after he put out his talking points, we're going to hand it over to Bob Dub so that she can respond to what he had to say. Now, remember, this is his talking points, guys. So don't worry about what I just previously said unless you want to talk about it. But stay focused on what Julian had to say.
Julian, I think that's fascinating. I have found it very hard to understand the New Zealand system of government, and it's beyond me totally. So it's fascinating for me listening to you because I cannot understand the dynamics of it. From how I understood it always, socialism is a thing that happens in the world. And Karl Marx, when he came along, he observed socialism and decided that would be a good idea to force people to comply with this naturally occurring system. And so they took socialism and they forced people, 100 million people, to their graves. And that is communism. Communism is when you force a system that is meant to be voluntary. A mom is meant to love her children and give each one of them equally. When your neighbor comes over and steals, that is no longer socialism. That's communism. So my point of view has been, my point of view towards New Zealand, my anxiety about New Zealand is that they have taken something that belongs in the community, in the home, in the social environment, and they've put it into a political environment where it doesn't work. And it comes for me back to this idea that Vince has described to me about the masculine axis and the feminine axis, and how they both need to work in completely different ways to balance and moderate each other. So I think that in a way, I'm just in completely the wrong conversation here, because I'm not talking about politics. I'm saying that there needs to be politics and there needs to be another thing. And that other thing needs to work at the same time. And my groping in the dark makes me think that proportional representation is an attempt at our New Zealand society trying to find that balance. Do you see it like that, Julian?
Yeah, well, I was going to talk quite a bit about the MMP mixed member proportional system that we have in New Zealand, because I'm sure people overseas might not be familiar with how it works, particularly if you're over in the US or the UK, because MMP is quite common in Europe, and New Zealand's adopted the system from Europe. And before it came in, we really had a two-party system. So you would just have the Labour Party and the National Party, which are the two main left and right-wing parties in New Zealand. So they brought in MMP so that smaller parties could also get into Parliament. So you basically have two votes. You vote for your local candidate and you also vote for a nationwide party. And any party that gets over 5% of the party vote, they get into Parliament. So you have 120 MPs, 70 of those are electorate seats, and then the other are just list candidates. So the list candidates are just selected by their parties. They're not entirely appointed democratically. They're basically brought in depending on how much votes the party gets. But the problem is that the 5% threshold's quite high for any new parties. So no new political parties have actually been able to get into Parliament. All the parties in there have originally split off from the two main parties, the Labour and the National Party. And as you mentioned about the British Labour Party being socialist, it's very much the same with the New Zealand Labour Party. They like to sing the red flag and the other communist anthems behind closed doors. But the idea is to have greater representation by having more smaller parties, and these parties have to form together into coalitions. So the real problem with MMP is that the leading party that gets the most votes is not guaranteed to be able to form the government. So even if you win the vote, you could end up losing the election if a bunch of other parties form a coalition and can form a majority. So we've seen that in the Netherlands, where Geert Wilders got the most votes, but I don't think he's been able to form the coalition where he becomes the prime minister. And often the smaller parties, we had Jacinda Ardern, who was, a prime example of a feminine authoritarian. So authoritarianism with smiling face and lipstick, so she was originally very popular, but she turned out to be quite authoritarian during the pandemic. And she actually got a lot less votes than the opposition party, but she was able to become prime minister with the help of Winston Peters, who's the kingmaker. So he's the centrist party. So basically this one little party that gets about 5 or 6% of the vote, they get to decide for the entire country whether the government goes left wing or right wing. So the downside of MMP is that the biggest party doesn't always win. So the loser sometimes wins and the winner loses. It does give more parties representation, but they still have basically formed into a left wing and a right wing bloc. And it's tricky for new ideas to get into Parliament.
How interesting. Otto, I know that you have quite a few ideas on proportional representation. I think it's your turn to respond.
Me? I had a few things here, and I am interested in proportional representation. Couple of things I wanted to talk about, getting back to what Mark was saying about a more nuanced way of using the words communism and socialism. A lot of what we're doing right now is dancing around definitions. I think, Bob, you've got talking about coercion, which was something I was going to bring up, and that's a big part of it. If you're coerced or not, this gets back to Aristotle, who divided things not into like capitalist or communist, but whether a society or a government is corrupt or excellent. So that when it just seems to me that really the touchstone has to do with this coercion. If you're being coerced into an activity, that's completely different about engaging in it yourself. And one of the issues has to do with basically distribution, or if you like, redistribution of wealth. And it seems to me that people should be allowed to dispose of their own property the way they want. They're going to help their family and their friends. There's nothing wrong with this. You shouldn't be forced to help people that you don't know or that you might not be able to afford to help. Now, at the same time, that being said, if any basic kingdom setting up in primitive times, whatever, you're the king, the first thing you got to do is take care of your people to a certain extent, because without people, you don't have a kingdom. So you have all the people come and work 1 day out of 7 on your land. So in theory, you have 1/7 of the agricultural produce of your country. And this is a lot more than you need just to feed yourself, because in times of famine, This food can be redistributed to people that are going hungry. In times of war, you might have the whole countryside come into your castle for protection. You're going to need to feed all those guys. So there's always been the idea that society as a whole has to look out for itself collectively. And we are very used to separating government from society. That was not always the case. If you read Aristotle and Plato, those guys, they all treat of society and government as being the same thing, and they more or less were. We have really separated our thoughts about ourselves as separate from our governments, even in countries like the United States, where this was not always the case. You know, we went through a period where we were taught to feel separate from our government, in the world and not of it, to the point now, and I'm sure you've all seen the amusing videos of people claiming that the local state police don't have any authority over them because of some article of confederation or something, which was perfectly valid in 16 something, but it's just been rather superseded. And it's like, well, what country where is your society then? What country do you belong in? Will you please burn your passport, driver's license, and credit card then, please? I'm sure your country, whatever it is, will issue. No, you're in the society you're in, and you have to deal with it willy-nilly. But yeah, I think people originally saw little or no difference between their society and their government. It was all like more of a seamless continuum kind of thing. But yeah, but in any event, there's always been a collective activity of people. It usually doesn't have to be directed forcibly. And this all gets back to Plato's Republic, which Plato thought that, and he got this from the Pythagoreans, I think, unity was the highest good. So ultimately, he wanted to compel everyone to be unified. In Plato's perfect state, there is no private property. There is no privacy. There is no giving or taking in marriage. There is no family. And there is no education beyond what is needed for you to perform your job. And it sounds familiar, doesn't it? In fact, every authoritarianism, right, left, and sideways, I would say ultimately anything that wants to coerce you into conforming. And I guess that's my pet thing about this. It has to do with the coercive factor. If people want to get together and try to create any kind of a social or economic system they want to, great. I wish you luck. But better not, point a bayonet at me and say, well, you've got to be part of it too. No, thank you. And what's the old saying? Your right to swing your frying pan ends where my nose begins. And I think that's, my basic attitude about that. So.
Just on the point of Plato's Republic, I mean, it's a fascinating book. Obviously, I'm hoping to actually write a book about the Republic as well at some stage. But I believe the communal ownership of property is mainly for the philosopher kings and the guardian class, whereas the working class, I believe, still can have money and private property to some extent. But yeah, it's different to how our society is, because politicians can benefit financially from being in power. So there's a financial incentive for them to get into parliament and being in a position of power. I would prefer what Plato said, where the politicians should basically not get paid. They should live communally in basic huts, and then the only people who would want the power would be the people who are not doing it for financial gain. So, I'm sure that socialists and communists do see inspiration in Plato's Republic, but my personal understanding is that it doesn't apply across the whole society. It's mainly to keep the politicians and the ruling class in poverty.
Well, you got to remember the philosopher kings, their main job was to maintain the society. They didn't really have, they weren't meant to be going around and philosophizing. It all had to do with the orderliness of the society. And of course, the guardians were the guardians. They were the ones who held the knowledge. And I think Plato understood that you needed to have, to a certain extent, a state needed to be supported by the more or less normal functioning of the economy of Greece at that time. I don't think he could see, I didn't think he could see anything too advanced about that. It's still going to be the same kind of basic, olive culture and the same traditional farms and farming techniques and stuff like that. But I think just his emphasis on compulsion and ignorance and educating people. And again, it starts off with I think it's the age of 8 they start them with. Everyone over the age of 8 or 9 is marched out of the city and is never seen again. ... All shot one. So he starts off creating his perfect city by mass slaughter. And of course, I've seen this argued that it's just kind of a joke. But actually, there was a guy named Strauss did some fascinating lectures on related topics in the 1950s, and he wrote about and lectured about how Plato's Republic is actually a reflection of the Assemblywoman, the play that Aristophanes wrote. And basically, Plato had Aristophanes' play in front of him, and it's basically a refutation of Aristophanes. And there's actually something on my channel, a guy I know who is very interested in Aristotle and Plato and these subjects, does a presentation of this analysis. You might find it of interest, and I will get the link to you. I think, especially if you're interested in Plato and in the Greeks, you know what they say, start with the Greeks if you want to understand our civilization. And if you are interested in Plato, Aristotle is a good way to understand him, I think. But
awesome. Okay, awesome. Oh, you're back. Great, Roger. All right.
Roger, we missed you. Where were you?
Hi. Let's see. Funnily enough, I've got no talking points. As you know, I'm more of a I'm just thinking. It's interesting to look at the idea of power dynamics within parliaments or within parliaments. When you consider that the government isn't the only real power dynamic. You've also got the things like the opposition, you've got the higher houses, so in the UK it'd be the House of Lords. We are seeing at this present moment, especially in the UK, where there's a potential of Labour coming into power in June the 4th or July the 4th elections. A real possible happening, but we've seen new parties being created and the possibility of new parties becoming the opposition. So in the UK case, we could see a increase in the Reform Party being part of the opposition. So the idea of governments having full control is just a misnomer, right? Yeah, I leave it at that. Okay.
Oh, I almost forgot. I did want to ask Julian a question about Parliament. Now, you mentioned that there's a threshold of 5%. Do you think it would help if the threshold were lower, say like 2% or something like that? Do you think more parties would help shake things up more, or do you think that's the way the rules are written is what's making it happen?
Yeah, I think you can see in other countries that if you have a lower threshold, then obviously it's easier for more smaller parties to get in, because with the 5% threshold, if you vote for a party and it gets less than 5%, which is quite a few of the more fringe parties, and then your vote is essentially wasted. So that means that your vote's not counted. So that proportionally means it's easier for some of these other parties to get votes because they're not having to count 100% of the votes. The proportion is going to be scaled up from the whatever 90-something% of the votes. So it's a lot better to have a lower threshold because then you have more variety in Parliament. But the problem is you get also some fringe lunatic parties being able to get in. So
party.
positives.
party.
I mean, in New Zealand, there was a party called the Christian Coalition, I believe it was the Christian Coalition, and they got about 4%. So they were very close to getting in, but it came out that their leader was a pedo. So people were relieved at that point because of the 5% threshold had kept them out. But obviously there's a lot of genuine movements that can't get any representation. So personally, I'd like to see the threshold lower, and that would also introduce more permutations in the coalition negotiations. Usually there's just usually we have Winston Peters, who is sort of like the Donald Trump of New Zealand. He's a Maori. He's sort of a Maori version of Donald Trump. He's a nationalist and a centrist. And he basically is always in the middle, who deciding whether to go with the left or the right. So it'd be good if there was multiple parties in the middle that could make different permutations and combinations.
Right.
So it's not just this one guy deciding for the whole country.
You can make more compromises that way instead of just having one guy be the kingmaker.
Okay,
Because
so
I'm sure he has a lot of power in a position like that.
So, is that all you got to say, Mark? Was that all you had to say?
Sorry, I just wanted to get that cleared up real quick.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have any response to what Mark said, Julian?
It was interesting how you mentioned about the House of Lords and the different parts of the parliamentary system. In New Zealand, we really have sort of a constitutional crisis because we don't see the same separation of powers like you would have in the United States. For example, we used to have an upper house like a Senate, but it was unelected people appointed by the UK who were put into that upper chamber. So it was simply abolished so that New Zealand could be more independent from the UK, but we never implemented our own Senate with or upper house. So everything's done through one House of Parliament. But you also have the Prime Minister, who is like the majority leader, being the most powerful person in the House, more powerful than the Speaker. And they also are the head of the Cabinet, which is like the executive. And then they get to appoint the Governor General, who is the representation of the monarch. So the representative of King Charles is essentially the head of state in New Zealand, but they're entirely unelected and they're just appointed by the Prime Minister. So you basically have all the legislature and executive just all rolled into one body. They can pass any law they want, and the courts cannot overturn the laws that they pass. So you really have the three branches of government being collapsed into one in New Zealand, which makes it very easy for them to do whatever they want. And there's not really a proper constitution in the fact that they can simply vote to change the constitution at any time, potentially without even a supermajority. They might be able to just use a simple majority to change the rules, and then they could rewrite the Bill of Rights and rewrite the constitution, and it's incredibly easy for them to make changes like that. So there's seen as constitutional problems with the way New Zealand does it, but obviously the people in power love the fact that they have unlimited say once they get elected.
There you go. Now, do you have any response to that, Mark?
Yeah, I was just thinking, as far as the EU's concerned, you've got these elected members, but they haven't really got very much control because you've got a European Council, and then an elected body that will tell what tell the EU members what to vote upon. And there's the old comical thing of the Lisbon Treaty, where the EU went to Ireland, or the Republic of Ireland, and said you vote on membership of the EU, or you vote on the Lisbon Treaty, and when the public of the voted, the EU said you voted incorrectly, vote again, and I think this happened 2-3 times. And we are seeing, as far as the UK is concerned, you've still got some areas where the EU still takes control of, such as farmer subsidies, fishing subsidies, the migration issues that we're seeing at this present moment, and but also we are also seeing control by the European Court of Justice, where there are certain laws enshrined in the UK which states that any new laws have to be considered by a set of standards as set by a foreign entity, the European Court, and we are coming in the next couple of months, years. We are seeing the World Economic Forum's pandemic treaty, in which if countries sign it, they will have less power to set their own laws, and these laws will be overseen by an unelected WF, an unelected cabal, if you like, of people. So yeah, we are seeing more and more power given to unelected NGOs, tangos, if you want.
Yeah. That it. Okay, so I guess it's my turn. I believe so. So there's a couple of things that stuck out to me, and it was like when you were talking about the Greeks. Now, first I want to say before I get started, small Greek wieners. That's it, right there. But other than that, I think when it comes to the way people see things, especially here in the United States, we like to call ourselves a democracy, and the truth is we aren't a democratic government. We're a republic, you know what I mean? And the reason why 80% of the people in that democracy were slaves, 20% were the freaking actual citizens who had the rights that a citizen would have, while 80% of that population were slaves to those 20%, and that was what they considered a democracy, and that's something that a lot of people don't really understand when it comes to democracies. It's geared to where you're a slave to somebody, or you are a part of the 20% who actually have rights, you know what I mean? So another thing that sticks out to me with what you were talking about, the first thing that popped out was the unelected official. Here in the United States, we say you're either elected or you're selected. Now, government isn't your friend, period. If you have people in government, those people in government are usually people who freaking are selected for their position. They never are elected into office. You know what I mean? And that is something that I freaking have an issue with. And with the election systems here, what it relates to when it comes to what you guys are talking about with these political parties is I've seen where our freaking elections have been handed over to the political parties, and that's not the way it should have been. The founder, or not the founder, I'll say, first president of our country was George Washington, and he refused to join a political party because he said it was going to be the downfall to this country. And by what I see, it really is, okay? The thing that is really bad is the electoral vote here in the United States, okay? So you've got freaking the power handed over to these political parties, and they appoint one person from each political party to determine where their votes go to, and they've got a certain amount for each party. So each state, they count the freaking the votes up. They've got Republican, and then they got the Democrat, and then the independent people who are selected to make the votes for those people. Now, whoever gets the most votes gets to make the vote for that political party. The rest of those votes are gone for that state. All right. So basically, it's a popularity contest between these political parties. Whoever gets the most votes gets to actually do the electoral vote, and the rest of the votes don't matter after that point. You see what I mean? And last week we were talking about who actually whose vote actually counts. You know what I mean? I said we were going to discuss that, and this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about whose votes actually count. It's whose political party gets the most votes. It's not who freaking actually gets the most votes. It's not freaking Joe Biden or Donald Trump. It's does the Republican Party get more votes than the freaking Democratic Party? And that's what it comes down to. You know, I don't agree with it. Everybody says, well, it's set up for a reason, and the only thing I found out is freaking our government feels that freaking there are just some people who aren't smart enough to freaking make an intelligent decision. So those people have to be freaking counted out. All those crazy freaking psycho fringe political parties. Freaking you were talking about, Julian, you know what I mean? They're not smart enough to vote, so we gotta freaking stop them from freaking being able to vote, you know. And this brings me to what you're talking about with your Senate. I have a breakaway on the whole idea of if the Senate is good or not, because I've got a little history on that here in the United States too. Okay. Before we had the Senate here in the United States, we had the House of Representatives. And the House of Representatives was all the representatives from the states meeting in Washington, D.C. They came up with laws, and before they could pass that law, those representatives had to go back to each state and talk to the House of Representatives in that state before they could go back to Washington and make a final decision. Now, that right there was the states actually getting involved. Well, the federal government felt that it would be better to freaking separate state from federal a little bit more by creating the Senate, where they could have senators as well as House of Representatives showing up in Washington, taking care of their business there, and then these representatives didn't have to go back to the states and get the states' decision on everything. So that basically freaking separated your federal government from your state government. Okay, so in that aspect, freaking the people are not being heard. You know what I mean? You're getting more power in freaking Washington D.C. and less in the surrounding states. So I'm kind of split on the whole Senate thing. Maybe it's a better thing you guys don't have the Senate, because then your representatives can actually go back to where they were actually voted into office, and they can get the proper decision before they decide to frickin' vote, rather than be able to sit up there in your Capitol and make decisions without your consent, you know. So when it comes to that, that's the thing that I have an issue with. Other than that, you guys talked about so many great things. I don't even know if I freaking can keep up with you. Like I lost track. And Mark, he's just a play on words. He knows good shit. That's all I got on that.
There's a couple.
Wait,
Sorry,
hold up.
hold
Hold up. It's Jillian's turn. You guys, you see, troublemakers.
Oh, it's all good. I'll just quickly, just getting back to where you started with the whole the rise of socialism in the 1930s, and that's ultimately the British Empire was dismantled from within because these, they saw it as imperialism or whatever, so they wanted to undermine the power of the British Commonwealth, and so New Zealand adopted the Statute of Westminster, which prevented UK from passing laws on our behalf. But we really also had a potential constitutional crisis in 1986 because Parliament repealed the Statute of Westminster, which had given New Zealand legitimacy, and then they created a new constitution and essentially said that there's a new parliament that's essentially independent from the UK now. Many people believe that they repealed the very law which gave them legitimacy and then tried to continue from a fresh start without sort of having the mandate of the public. So in places like Canada, we saw that they had to have a referendum when they did this. So if they have a referendum, that gives them more legitimacy because the public are voting for this new parliament to be recognised. And of course Canada adopted a new flag which gave that independent parliament a new symbol. They tried to do the same thing here to try and to rectify this constitutional issue. They had a flag referendum where they tried to change the New Zealand flag, but it did not pass, so we're still flying the British Union Jack on our flag.
Okay. All right, you want to say something, Mark? I noticed you got fired up.
New Zealand, you remember that New Zealand is still part of the Commonwealth, and therefore the flag is appropriate. I was just thinking, you were talking about the ability to vote, and I was just thinking, I think I mentioned this on our last stream, that universal voting is a relatively new idea. Up to, let's say, 100 years ago, women weren't able to vote, well, generally speaking. It was only up to, let's say, I don't know when it was, mid-19th century, it was only the so-called free men of the nation that could vote. Which means a lot of the working class, a lot of the population would not be able to pass their ballot. When I was talking about the powers in relation to the European Commission and WEF, there was something I totally missed out. There's an old 1980s Yes Minister sketch. Yes Minister being a very popular comedy show from the 1980s British comedy show that looked at the workings of Parliament and the workings of the Prime Minister's office. And there's a very good line that was spoken by one of the senior civil servants who mentioned that the real power doesn't really lie with the governments. After all, governments come and go every 5-10 years. They all they get moved. But the power, a lot of power, is reliant on civil servants. And we've seen issues in the UK recently with things like the migration issue, where civil servants not not working in good faith and try to push their own agendas on the state.
Yeah. All right. So, now that you're done, we are going to hand this over to Bob Dub, which is her turn to make a comment.
My turn to make a comment.
Yeah, on what Julian said.
I don't have any more comments, I'm afraid. My comment is, no, I don't have any more comments. It's all very interesting.
All right. What about you, Otto?
I agree with everything Bob just said. As a matter of fact, I'm completely behind her 1,000%. Well, once more, your pity, witty, and insightful insights. What weird way.
Thank you for validating me like that, Otto. I've been waiting for that all morning.
Okay, since we've been around the table with all of our comments on what Julian had to say, now I am turning it over to Bob Dub.
Okay. Well, I don't think I want to back down on my stance, Roger. I think that I want to just underline this is my position for the day, and I will not back down. And with that, I hand back to the chairman.
Well, I mean, that was your talking point, you know what I'm saying?
I'm sorry, Roger. I don't really have a talking point. I think that one of the things that I have been wanting to bring up for a little while was the UBI experiments that have been done randomly over the ages, and mostly shelved and not brought to fruition, but some suggestive results from some of those show that with the universal basic income, the recipients did not become lazy. They became more entrepreneurial. They earned more. This laziness never materialized. The drunkenness and the debauchery has never materialized. In fact, what did happen was that there was a drop in crime and a more healthy and balanced community as a result. There was also some very interesting things that people started working harder. They found that a short-term UBI was the least impactful. So it definitely takes some time for people to change their minds and understand that they're not being tricked after years and years and years of being manipulated, as has been mentioned several times this morning. So this freedom that people have when they have enough money to live on seems to provide a huge boost to creativity and productivity if you give it time. I think that one of my interests in Mint Me as a platform is that it is an experimental place where we do not have to have the risks involved. Like, for instance, this fellow Marx came up with this idea about enforcing socialism. Some people jumped on board, and 100 million lives later, we discovered that it actually wasn't such a good system. However, with something like mince-me, which we do on a really small scale, you don't need to have these risks. We can jump into a system, we can play with tokenization and authentication and community building and working for the good of another person, not for the good of your own family. All these very strange, progressive ideas can be experimented with in controlled ways. And one of the wonderful things with the Minds Gaming, Minds the card game token, is that he is on a mission to give people an opportunity to mint their own coin for free, and he is in a position at the moment where he can sponsor a person with a new coin, a new token, to actually deploy their token onto the blockchain and begin that process. What are you interested in? Do you want to trade up your token? Do you want to start a community? Do you want to have a vision for the future? Do you want to network with friends? So I feel that, again, sort of introducing something not political into a political system, maybe what we've discovered is that politics is a very limiting way of organizing human beings. And you mentioned earlier about how we need a slave system. We need these people to be there to be used. The other thing that I find with politics is not just that there is just a slave system, but that you take all the psychopaths of your country, everybody with a deep, dark desire to control other people's ways of being. You know, the definition of mental illness among some communities. You take these people with the desire to control and you give them access to the tax money of the entire population. Just feel for me that there are so many ethical concerns that need to be explored, that sometimes it's not just the theory that's important, but being able to be the sort of person who is able to step into an experiment and try to push the boundaries and see if it's going to work or if it's going to fail. And for me, that's what true anarchy is when you step up and you say, all right, I'm going to put my life on the line. I'm going to try this. There we go, Roger. That would be my talking point.
I thought you didn't have a talking point. What the hell, dude? Like, you freaking had a talking point, Bob Dub. You do good, so.
Thanks.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, my problem with the universal basic income is that it's a lot of money that would have to be found to pay out to everyone each week. And, you know, in New Zealand, it would be in the order of at least $100 million a year. 100 billion, sorry. So it's, we saw the wage subsidy during the pandemic where the government was paying people's wages, and of course the government doesn't just have a big pool of money as people think. They actually only have money which they've taken off other people, or debt which they have borrowed, and used the public as the collateral to repay that debt. So during the wage subsidy, New Zealand took on a huge increase in public debt, and that's partly what's caused the inflation and everything to happen. And you also, I mean, I support the idea that people on unemployment benefits should be able to work and earn extra money on the side, so that aspect of it could work. But you have the problem now with the pension, where you have a lot of wealthy people who are able to claim the welfare, so it's costing the money a lot. But once you're over 65, you can claim welfare in New Zealand universally, regardless of how much income you have. So I think it would be better targeted to people who actually need it the most. And I would also prefer something like they have in Alaska, where you have a royalty on your exploration of minerals and oil and mining and that sort of thing. So citizens do get a dividend there coming from the royalties on the mining. So it's not just the government having to find that money out of thin air.
That would be my biggest negative against it, is that you can't do it in the system that we have right now, because what you're doing right now is you're trying to just redistribute tax money, which is apparently government's money. What I'm suggesting is a system where the resources of the country are distributed amongst the population of the country, not that the resources of the country are controlled and selectively deployed into the political psychopaths' pockets. I'm saying a whole new way of thinking about resource distribution. But there's a huge big problem, because what do you do then about somebody who's living in the middle of the Sahara Desert? Because he's got enough sand. He doesn't need more sand. So I'm not saying that I'm coming here with a whole lot of solutions. I'm coming to the table with a whole lot of objections to the current system, because I don't have blood in my veins. I only have anarchy flowing.
The monster. She's the beast.
I am the beast.
Okay, so now Otto, your turn.
Well, I can see with speaking about UBI, the difficulties in an economy like New Zealand's. I would point out that historically, governments do things to redistribute wealth as opposed to mere taxation. In one form or another. For example, the United States is technically a commonwealth, and much of the oil, if not most of the oil that the United States has, and we have some of the largest reserves in the world, are actually owned by the people. They're on public land. Technically, I am a part owner in all of this, and usually what happens is the government leases the land to oil companies and so forth and so on for big bucks. But in every other major oil-producing country, and in fact in every minor oil-producing country, the citizens of that country get gasoline and oil products at a subsidized price. This was the exact same thing in the United States up until, the time of history's greatest monster, Jimmy Carter. I was there, and I watched gasoline prices climbing, and we couldn't believe it. And this was really one of the first really bad knockout blows of the economy. It was a really bad time, and I think it was a very foolish thing to do. This is when they were pushing that whole myth that we were all going to run out of gas by 1979 or something like that. There would be no more gasoline. So, we're going to deregulate fuel prices. Now, there is a movement, I believe. There's a lobbying group that is trying to reintroduce this. I don't think that they're going to be successful. They never like to lower the prices after they've, But I remember as a young man driving along and seeing gasoline for 40 cents a gallon and saying, my God, that's outrageous. I would never pay that much. I know where I can get it for 30 cents a gallon, 40 cents a gallon. So yeah, but these are ways that the wealth is shared among all the citizens, the common wealth. You can also do it in things like infrastructure, public roads, bridges, irrigation. We had something here called the Tennessee Valley Authority, which electrified huge areas of places in the rural Tennessee Valley and down like West Virginia and places like in there, which were really, really not that far out of the Middle Ages. I mean, as late as into the 1920s and 30s in some places, The U.S. really, and of course, the Second World War was sort of responsible in some ways, but really didn't catch up, didn't resemble anything like the USA of today until into the 1950s. I mean, guys like Terry Gilliam, Terry Gilliam, the Monty Pythoner from America. If you ever listen to some of his reminiscences or read him, once in a while he mentions the fact that when he was a kid growing up, they did not have a flush toilet. They had an outhouse. This was not untypical in America at that time, and he was seeing the tail end of it, if you'll pardon the pun, which was completely unintentional, but of that sort of thing. But I think it was Dwight Eisenhower. I think the U.S. Army did a thing where they were just basically they went from like the Atlantic to the Pacific, a U.S. Army group of trucks and stuff like that. It took them months. You go online, there's pictures of like Army trucks being pulled out by teams of oxen, mud up to the axles. There was no anything like the interstate system we have today. And in fact, Eisenhower really pushed for that when he became president, probably because he had that, several month long journey of his trucks being pulled by oxen. It does. So there are a lot of ways. And universal basic income itself, it strikes me, if the fact that it's universal means at a certain level, it does have a leveling effect, but it also seems to me, I think of it as like if you give everybody an automobile, everybody has a car. Now, what's that going to mean? Well, there'll be some downside. Some people will crash their cars. Some people will lose their cars. Some people will sell their cars for drugs. Other people will drive their cars, or they maybe have an extra car and sell it and get more money. But after a while, there will be an uptick in driving. More people will go to the store more often. More people will take longer trips. More people will buy more gasoline. They might do more. So you will have an effect, but it's going to be a slow general one. And to tell you the truth, I don't see it as being too overly dramatic. I mean, in an individual life, yeah, if you didn't have a car and wow, now I can get to work, yeah, it can be a whole thing. But for most people, it would be something like, oh, geez, I don't have to wait till, my husband gets home before I can take the car to the store. Or, yes, I can loan my sister the car, whatever. So it might be a minor convenience. But because that it's spread evenly throughout the society, it'll have a gradual kind of an effect. And then within a couple of years, you'll notice, wow, people are driving a lot more. But, and I imagine something like UBI would be more or less the same. It would, for some people, it would be a godsend. For other people, it would be a waste. For other people, it wouldn't make a huge difference, but you would see an overall change in things, more spending. I could see it as being, I don't know, I'm not an economist. I have no idea how it would actually work out. But that is that point, though, when you're in a smaller economy like New Zealand, you just, where does the money come from? Where's the money? I mean, $100 billion a year. I mean, the Pentagon loses that here. We could do that. The U.S. could simply pay for New Zealand to pay. It's awesome.
You could actually pay for your own people. Imagine if you did that.
Oh my goodness, it would be a lot cheaper than what they do now. In fact, that was one of Robert Anton Wilson's points. He was a big supporter of UBI, and he said, well, he actually liked the idea of what they called, like basically issuing everybody stock in the country. Make the whole country, so when you were born, you would be a stockholder and you get a stock certificate and you'd be paid dividends from the country. And he said if you came up with something like that, I don't know, somebody did a study, but it would actually be less expensive than all of the massive welfare platforms that we have in operation in all 50 states right now. Because you have, again, and I've gone on about this before, the U.S. has so many different agencies all doing more or less the same thing in all these different localities. And in some ways it's good. You don't want government to be too streamlined. It makes it too efficient. You don't want government to be too efficient. You've got to live under it. So I don't mind them being a little confused and overlapping sometimes. But it can be very confusing. It's like that whole argument about they go defund the police or down with the police. And here in the United States, as I'm sure Roger knows, and anyone that's ever been here knows, you've got every state in the union has its state police. The county have their police. Different branches of things, like we have county investigators that are police officers. You've got all kinds of federal agencies that carry guns, including the IRS. You've got thousands down in Florida. You've got fish police. You've got special game police. There are probably literally tens of thousands of different police agencies in the U.S. And there's no such thing as the police. There's like all these different groups, and some of them are really. I knew a guy that was a state trooper, and they were going on about like some police brutality. And I said, "What makes guys do that? Why would a cop do that?" And he says, "Bad training." He says, "And you get these guys. It's like somebody got elected, so he appoints his cousin to be the sheriff, and he appoints his nephew, And these guys are not trained properly. They're just, it's like, and it just has to do with the fact that you get a huge change in quality. And I mean, it's from person to person too. It's like I always said about religion. If you're a good, kind, ethical person, then you're going to have a good, kind, ethical religion, no matter what it is. And if you're an idiot and a fool and evil, you're going to have an idiotic, foolish, evil religion, no matter what that religion is. And it's the same thing with any other person you meet. I've met some really good cops. I know there's also some cops out there that are not so much. And it's really an individual equation. Well, I think that was all I had to say. I'm kind of babbling now.
Did a good job babbling. Great job.
Yeah, babble on.
So what do you have to say to that, Bob Dub?
It's really interesting. It's tricky and it's difficult, and like you say, it comes down to the individual and the individual level. And I think that one of the things that you've been saying about this development of socialism in Britain and everything, Roger, one of the things I've noticed is how this party splits and that party splits, and this guy disagrees and that guy goes off and this person doesn't agree. And I'm thinking, you see, this is the main problem that we have in the world. We've tried to get to some place where we all agree on something. What if we tried to get to the place where every single person has the right to be him? He doesn't need to agree with anybody else. Like, what would happen if we decentralized to the level of each individual? You could never do it in the world before because you didn't have computers. But now you have computers, you have quantum computers, you have massive data centers that need nuclear power plants to run them. The world is changing, and the responsibility is in the hands of the people. But the people have forgotten how to wield their own responsibility. They have forgotten how to be part of a cooperative society. They're so busy competing with each other and trying to find the best way to think, or the best way to implement this, or the solution that's going to fix that. What if the solution is that each one of us is vitally important? What if each one of us is, say, the page in a book? And you can still have that book without that page. You can tear that page out and throw it away. But you'll never be able to read that story, and the book will always lack that story. No matter how many times you read the book, you'll never get to read what was on that page. So it's just a completely different way of approaching the structure of society. Instead of saying, this will never work, it's never been implemented before, it's never been successful. What about, this has never worked in this way? What if we used this technology? What if we experimented in this way? So there needs to be the structure, there needs to be the hierarchy, there needs to be the protection and the checks and balances that we have evolved since we were monkeys in caves. There needs to be a proper administrative system. Within that, within the protection that we offer to our people, like the police forces that we offer to our people, within the structure and within the hierarchy, there needs to be a flexibility and a trust in the goodness of the human organism, not the human individual, but the entirety of humanity functioning together at an individual level. That's a concept that humanity doesn't seem to be able to grasp at this moment in time.
That's good. So now that you've responded to Otto, I'm going to turn it over to Mark and let him make his comment. What do you have as a response to Bob Dub, Mark?
Okay, points that you made earlier, glad you made that. Something that really irritates me, and something that I come across all the time, is the expression government money. There is no such thing as government money. The only money that a government has is for electioneering purposes. All other money is state money. I hear this all the time, and it really annoys me. Really annoys me. Universal universal basic income. Interesting concept. I agree that this will take some time for them to not manifest, but to show what's the word I'm looking for? To show a sort of method sort of response. But I'm also thinking that this is obviously going to have to be paid for somehow. And obviously you can say everybody within a tax bracket of, I don't know, earning 10,000 US dollars or 10,000 pounds or whatever, not paying tax. But you are going to see a large an increase in taxation for the higher earners. And there's the argument that if the higher earners are being taxed heavily, then they will just leave and find a country, a state, which is much more better for their interests. So arguably, we can create money out of thin air at the moment. But yeah, those issues. I'm just wondering if the case of basic income is actually going to be sustainable in the long term, which I have my doubts for.
Yeah. I agree with you if we're trying to run it on taxation. I think taxation is a terrible, terrible, terrible system. I think that we have different wealth. We have different sorts of wealth in a country. I think that it's terribly cruel to get a man to go out to slave away every single day of his life from 8 in the morning until 5 at night, and then take a third of what he earns. I think that's one of the most brutal, horrendous things that you can do to men or women or people. I just can't see that is a way to encourage mental health and thriving in your community. There is a way to collect the resources of the country jointly together. There are lots of ways to do it wrong, but there are a few ways to do it right, and I don't think that we've stumbled across those ways yet. But I don't think that means that we stop. There's a way that, here's this planet, right? And it's got all this stuff under the ground, like oil and diamonds and coal, and then somebody stands on top of that piece of earth and says, everything under this place where I'm standing is mine. Like, really? Or somebody lives in a place where corn grows, and they say, wow, look at this amazing place, all this corn. I'm standing here in the middle of it, therefore it belongs to me. Really? Isn't this a very primitive way of thinking? Have we not got a different mindset now, where we don't actually need to say, I own this? But we have these resources. We have this oil. We have this corn. How are we going to do this for the good of humanity, for all of us, so that all the pages of our book can be relevant? Not just, oh yeah, sorry you were born a black woman in Tanzania and that your life expectancy is 27. Bad luck with that. But I'm okay.
So is that it? Like, you just went silent and everything. I kind of got thrown off.
Sorry, I thought that maybe I should stop with my enthusiasm and idealism at that moment. That's it.
I just want to come back on that one. It raises the sort of the road to hell is paved with good intentions side there. by there's two methods there. Either we have a sort of capitalistic society where people compete, and therefore a creation of organic innovation is made. Or we have your idea that of let's say a socialist idea, really, where the land that you're standing on is controlled by multiple people, and therefore who's going to regulate that? Who's going to make sure that those goods are going to? Again, you're talking about socialism, just again.
It's gnarly, Mark. You're right. It's gnarly.
All right.
Yeah.
So, with that, I guess I can say mine too. When I was listening, there's a couple things that stuck out to me. Like, we've been talking about politics, right? And everybody likes to separate politics from economics, but the truth of the matter is politics is all about economics. It's all about money. When you go to work and you get money and you put it in your wallet, that's politics right there, dude. You know, that's where the whole term politics originates from, is the amount of money you got in your pocket. You know, so when you were discussing currency, I think that's actually something that is very important to discuss too, like especially when it comes to cryptocurrency. A lot of people, which Mark hates the word cryptocurrency, but I mean that's the best way I can say it, you know.
Depends on the sort of, yeah.
But you know, I mean, when it comes to the way things run, when it comes to this currency and these tokens and all that, I can see where it's more aimed towards you are the one who determines how much money you get from this currency. You know what I mean? It's not mandated to you by some freaking government organization that says this is how much a dollar's worth, you know? You determine that. So in that aspect I like it, but I also I still, and there's nothing to justify it, but like with me, I have an issue with having something that's supposed to be currency that isn't in my pocket. You know what I mean? In my physical pocket that doesn't belong to me. You know, and that's one thing that I have an issue with. Now, when it comes to private property and stuff like that, I'm 100% for private property. I think that freaking people who came up with the idea to hand private property over to the state were nothing but tyrannical psychopaths who thought that we freaking didn't have the right to own the property that we live on. And I think everybody should have an opportunity to own their own property. You know, and the big example of that is because of what Mark's country did to my country. You know, when they were in power here, what really pissed us off was their army thought that they had the right to come into our property, take over our freaking house, and we couldn't say nothing about it. They could just march right in there, eat our food, you know.
Which you did to the Indians first. It's
No.
kind of like what humans do to each other.
They
Just walk in and take.
no, hold on, they did that
No,
first.
we had treaties first, then walked in and took.
Yeah, we signed treaties and stuff, but that's the reason why we ended up freaking having the Bill of Rights, okay, is because freaking we didn't want a government that had the right to come into our house and steal our shit. You see what I mean? And I brought this up before last year with me and Mark, okay? Constitutions, okay? You need to understand the difference between your guys' constitution and our constitution. Our constitution cannot be amended unless we have a constitutional convention where it has to be a unanimous vote. That means every frickin' state has to frickin' first agree to a constitutional convention. and it has to be on one subject. It can't be on a broad topics. It has to be on one subject for that convention. And then after every state agrees to it, or 3/4 of the states agree to it, then they come together and then they amend the Constitution. And to date, I don't think that we've ever had a constitutional convention to change the Constitution, because nobody's agreed to do that or has come to agree to it. Now, the reason for that is because we don't want freaking politicians coming in and changing the Constitution at a whim. All right, and that's what's happening in England. That's what's happening in New Zealand. That's what's happening in all of these quote unquote constitutional governments. Is they have the right to change their constitution according to a whim. You know what I mean? And that's one thing that I have noticed when it comes to all that. Now, I agree with a lot of things, but like with me, when it comes to corn, I will grow the amount of corn that it takes to feed my family. And other than that, I don't give a shit if frickin' Joe Blow down the street needs corn. Now, if he wants to trade frickin' some eggs for some corn, I'll make frickin' extra corn so that he can trade me some eggs. Because I'm not going to sit and grow corn and frickin' raise chickens at the same time, you see. That's the way it should work.
Absolutely.
That's the way it should work.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not saying that we should do away with private property at all. I feel that private property is terribly important and it's every person's right. I'm just saying that when there are a whole lot of diamonds in the crust of the earth, nobody owns those diamonds. Nobody owns the gold. Nobody owns the fertile soil. Private property is one category of ownership, and the resources of planet Earth are an entirely different category of resource.
Right.
So I agree with you on private property. The problem with what you're saying about growing enough corn for your family is that becomes a much more complex negotiation, because there isn't arable soil for everybody's family to do that. Some people do live in the middle of the Sahara Desert.
Not for long.
Move. Get the hell out of there. What you doing living in a desert?
See, this is the way of our culture. How dare you do it wrong, guys? How dare you want to live in a desert and take our... I don't know.
They do. There are better ones and stuff.
Well, think about it like this, okay? And I've said this for a while. You got people freaking with children living in the ghettos of freaking Chicago and New York City, and they have relatives that live in small towns freaking outside of the city, but they choose to live in these housing developments where drug dealers are dealing dope out front of their doors. And the reason why they'd rather frickin' be there than to move to their relatives is because they frickin' enjoy living in that frickin' type of shit. You know, they say they love their children. They say they love their children, but they don't love their children enough to frickin' put them in a frickin' environment that's safe and healthy for them.
Roger, we're all little baby computers, and we all get programmed by the life that we've lived. We have these ways of living imprinted into this virgin brain that we're given, and then we're stuck. If we live in a ghetto-like environment for a few years, we begin to operate in a ghetto way, and you cannot overcome your biology. You just, I mean, it's a lovely idea, and it's a great thought that we're so flexible, but we also have to understand that we work because we have mirror neurons in our brain that observe the environment and then attempt to make us implement behaviors that fit into that environment. Because that's all we are, a brain that functions there and tells our body, lift your hand, put food in your mouth, look at this thing, hear this bird. We have a limit to the amount of agency that we have over our brain, our heart, our stomach, our hormones.
I agree.
So it's hard to say these people live there because they want to.
Oh, it's
They live there
change.
because they've been programmed to
But-
be that type of
And
person.
that you have a biology that might make them have a predilection for it.
It's called move, change. You know,
Like you just said,
Yeah.
biology. That's what I took from what you said. Maybe you meant something differently, but
like biology's cool and everything, but there is something called change, and it's called move. You know what I mean? Get the hell out of there. Why just move. Go
we're
ahead.
not
I was going to say, the idea of choice, again, there's the environmental aspects of the mentioned, but also, if you cannot afford to move, then
Yeah.
you cannot move.
Well, right.
And you
Yeah.
leave your mum and your aunt and your brother and your best friend and your entire social life or your social support network to move to another place that looks down on you because you weren't born there and you're not part of the club. So why should anybody have any loyalty to you? You're not part of the community. Were you invited in? Why did you just think you could buy a house in our community and bring your low-class behaviors to where we are? It's a very easy argument, leave. It's what they say to women who are abused. Well, we won't take you seriously unless you leave him. Thanks, guys. Thanks for making it doubly impossible.
Yeah.
So there's the theory that comes in the textbooks, which is really great. What's your thing about Otto? There's in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. Is that
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. In theory, there is no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is.
Well,
It's
see,
kind of all about that.
it takes me back to the last thing I'm gonna say about that. Like, if I freaking went off that mentality that you just said, though, Bob Dub, I would have never went back to kindergarten. All right,
Yeah.
I know. I understand. I'm there too, Roger.
I would have
I'm
never.
there too.
My first day of kindergarten was horrible. You know.
Yeah.
And freaking,
Yep.
I went back because freaking my mom and dad told me, look, you need to go back.
Yeah.
You see,
I
so
I
now
know.
let me go ahead and freaking open this up to Otto because freaking it's his turn and
Well, I was just going to say something about Roberta's creeping socialism there and giving the corn to all. You know, corn is often used on the shields of Eastern European communist states. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. Talking about cornfields now. Oh yeah. Next thing you know, you'll have a sickle to reap it with. I see, my friend.
Oh, yeah.
Luckily, Senator McCarthy has been talking to me about you. And no. I would point out that I when you were talking about having private property being separate from Earth's resources, of course, the most valuable bits of private property are Earth's resources. But rather than separate distinctions, I think what you might be thinking about are overlapping distinctions. Because if you make these things separate, I mean, you said, if you stood in the middle of a cornfield and said, this is mine because I'm standing here. Well, let me tell you, I would never say that. I would say I'm standing here and this is mine because we drove these villagers out and I've got my guys with bayonets all around the perimeter and this is now my corn. I fought for it and I killed for it and some of my people were killed and this is it and we're going to not be hungry. Now, if you then came and said, no, this corn is for all of humanity, I'd say, oh, well, that's a relief. We can go home now. Just let me know when the bread is baked. Okay, I'm not going to plow any of this. Well, it's not, I'm not going to work for the good of humanity. I'm going to work for me and for the people and the families I have to feed now because their husbands are wounded in taking this land. And that gets back to what you were saying, too, about the scarcity of resources. And a lot of these arguments are around, whether you have a resource rich or a resource scarce environment. A lot of the arguments, the utopian arguments that I've seen, and Robert Anton Wilson again, we're talking in terms of having an economy of such abundance that we would no longer need to play the politics of scarcity. He even talked about having money, rather than inflation, having money that had lost value if you didn't spend it. Negative value money, deflation, if you like. Because we would have so much wealth
that it wouldn't matter. And this would solve the UBI problem, certainly. And this harks back to Kropotkin's book Conquest of Bread, where he came up with it. And I don't know how accurate his thoughts were, but I think I mentioned it before. He figured that if every single human being in Great Britain worked, rather than, as he estimated, 10% or 20%, and the rest being capitalist leeches or whatever, then there would be produced such an abundance that no one would have to work more than a few days a week, and there would be plenty for everyone. Now, again, I don't think that this is necessarily an accurate assessment, but it shows where the idea is. Some way of creating enough abundance that we no longer have to worry about the fact that if I don't defend this food, I'm not going to have it, and my family's not going to have it. And I'm not laughing at that person out there that's starving. I'm kind of sorry if I laugh. It's because I know that could be me if I wasn't strong enough. Kind of deal. And sure, we were angry at the Brits quartering their soldiers, and we were Brits the week before we signed the document. For the English coming in and quartering their soldiers, and that is in the Bill of Rights, where it is actually mentioned. They were really pissed about that. It's like being secure in your property and everything. And yeah, we did the same thing to the Indians. You can argue, and the Indians resisted as hard as we did. They failed, we succeeded. And and it's the same situation. And also the Indians worked damn hard at it, and a lot of people were lost on both sides. Those Indian wars were fierce, very fierce. So people fought, and as my grandfather, the Penobscot, said, there is no disgrace in being defeated by a superior enemy, just not in struggling against them. And but anyway, yeah, so I think what you're talking about, though, at least in our situation, is an overlapping thing. I think you need to have that private stewardship of property, because I think really government, I saw some woman make a statement, this resource is too valuable to allow an individual to own it. It must be owned by government. And I'm like, oh my goodness, that's a recipe for disaster. But you have the recognition of your stewardship. And this gets back to what we talked about before, the classical societies where ancient Greece, in the Athenian democracy, they would appoint wealthy citizens to important government positions because they paid for the government functions out of their own pockets. If they needed ships, they'd appoint you a trirarch, and that meant you were in charge of a trireme, which you built, which you crewed and paid for the crew the whole time. Yes. On the one hand, it was a way of saying I'm an important part of the government and I'm wealthy enough to be picked for this. But on the other hand, it was a way that, so there was civic pride with it as well. It wasn't like these guys are being dragged kicking and screaming. A triarch could be a very important person in the government, but he was also expected to pay for his pleasure in being a politician. It's like the opposite of what we do today in many ways. Not that I'm going to say anything about the fact that Athenian politicians were notoriously corrupt, especially after the Athenian Empire. I forget who was saying about they had the Delian League supposedly, and but the Athenians said you had to do all court business. Everybody in the league has to come to Athens to settle the court cases, because the courts were like 500 Athenian citizens at a time, and they knew they'd all get a couple of talents of silver each for every case they did. So it was basically, ka-ching.
Otto, it's so interesting because... Oh, sorry, Roger.
Oh, okay. So Mark, do you want to respond to that, and then we'll have Bob Dub respond to it.
There's an old concept that civil servants and politicians go into their job for the, dare I say, the greater good, for the idea of trying to do something good for their society. And now we've seen over the last 50, 60 odd years, the concept of civil servants and politicians going into politics, either for financial gain or B, to further their career. I mean, after all, how many ex-politicians I know in high roles of different companies.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the what's the Nick colleague that joined when he left politics. He became Facebook's European consultant or something.
I'm not. Yeah, it sounds right. I wouldn't be surprised.
So yeah, to shift away from wanting to aid your society into becoming a civil servant and just wanting to reap the financial rewards.
Indeed, yes.
That's a good point. So, do you have a response to that, Otto?
Oh, well, I just mentioned I quickly got me curious. I looked up Nick Clegg, Sir Nicholas William Peter Clegg, who is indeed a vice president and global affairs and communications at Facebook Incorporated, and is now president for global affairs. I wonder how he got that job.
Oh,
I'm sure
yeah.
he's
Yeah.
Okay, so now it's your turn, Bob. Go get him.
Roger, you make me nervous. You make me nervous. About the ants, right? I think that we have to always remember that we don't know anything, and everything that we do is a mistake. Back in the days when they thought that it would be great if we were all like ants, what they didn't realize was that there are a significant number of ants in the colony who never ever do anything. And we've only found that out now with computers and surveillance equipment. We used to think that all of these ants were making this colony. But now we realize that no, there are ants that just don't pull their weight ever, their whole lives. We don't know why, but we just understand that we have now discovered that this idea that we had of all us working like ants is something that could never happen because ants don't all work together. I think that it's very interesting when you talk about how you wouldn't just go and stand in the middle of your land and say that you owned it, you would fight for it. It's so fascinating to me, the shortfalls, the difficulties, I don't know what the word is, of patriarchy and matriarchy. Patriarchy is a brilliant system. It provides for the family, it's very aggressive, it protects people, it's driven, it's working towards excellence. It's an amazing system. But in order for it to be amazing, it has to go to war and it has to kill people. And it has to have a slave class. Matriarchy is a great system because it encourages cooperation and living in harmony with nature. It builds great big families and happy societies. There are some places in Europe, I think, where they've shown that there were agricultural communities, and that for over 6,000 years in the archaeological record, there wasn't a single defense structure in any of those communities. There was an amazing agrarian matriarchal system where creativity and links between people just flourished. However, the great flaw in matriarchy is child sacrifice. For some reason, matriarchal societies kill children. And we look at what's happening now with abortion and transgenderism and things, and you see this is the modern outworking of the matriarchal flaw. So somehow there is possibly if we could balance the matriarchy and the patriarchy and bring these two systems so that each one of them was the checks and balances of the other one. Because I don't think that it's right to manipulate and dominate the world's resources through the death of other groups of people. I don't think it's right to manipulate and control our own societies by killing our children. I just sort of feel that somewhere between killing our children and killing other groups of people, somewhere inside of there are the magic Goldilocks conditions for human flourishing.
All right, that's a little bit too complex for me. I don't even know if I want to respond to that. Like, now, I believe after Otto, it is actually Mark's turn, right?
Oh,
Mark, did you already respond to Otto's what Otto said? No, it's your turn, isn't it? Wait, no.
I've got.
Wait, you did it, and then
Um,
Bob Dub did it. Okay, so it would be my turn then.
yeah.
Now, the
Yeah.
thing that I wanted to mention was, like, we were talking about the Greeks, and I mentioned the whole fact that 80% of the population was basically a slave state, and then 20% was citizens. Now, with the freaking poor, you could become a citizen, but you had to freaking be able to join the military, and through the military you could become a citizen. But that was the only way of doing it. So, and a lot of people aren't aware that that's actually the reason why the draft was actually adopted. And England did conscription as well, and pretty much every country did it, and it was based off of these old Greek ideas where frickin' you were obligated to frickin' serve in the military because it was your duty to frickin' fight and die for your country, and stuff like that. And everybody has a frickin' opinion on that, but me personally, I think that's a load of shit. I think you should frickin' be able to volunteer frickin' to be a part of your country. And it always seemed the common theme too was always the poor man that frickin' was drafted before the rich man. You know what I mean? So that was
Yeah.
that was another thing that frickin' always seemed to get to me. And like and you can say, oh no, if you were in college and stuff, and you could avoid the draft, but you know what? Poor people couldn't afford to go to college and learn an education, so that still is something that was delegated to people who had enough money to send their kids to college. So, and things like that is what frickin' I have an issue with when it comes to going off of these old democratic ideas that were founded in Greece, and using the term democracy when in reality we're not supposed to be a democracy, at least not here in the United States. That was one thing that always did bug me. Now, the whole thing about corn and getting back to corn, like I agree with what
Have you downloaded the team app?
I agree with what freaking Otto said about most of what or all that is, like the whole communist idea. And the thing that sticks out to me too with that whole idea is the fact that freaking, people think that you're obligated to the greater good, like Mark was talking about. And you know what? Who determines what the greater good is? I mean, take away my individual rights so that I can freaking worry about other people, So that means I'm indispensable, or I'm dispensable, and so are you. As long as freaking our lives can be sacrificed for freaking this person and this person and this person and this person who we don't even know, So that's the one thing that I have issues about. I believe the individual is more important than the greater good, and I'll say that until freaking the day I die. It's you can call it selfishness if you want to, but I believe that freaking each human life is just important as 50 human lives put together. That's all I got.
I agree with you on that, Roger. I agree with you on that because that's where I think hierarchy comes into it. we as an individual, each individual has to look after themselves and has to try and rise to the top of their hierarchy. That's your individual responsibility, your mandate from God, if you like. But that's not enough, because what do you do about the guys that are starving to death in Somalia? Like, the point of you getting to the top of the hierarchy is so that you do produce more, so that the people underneath you get more and can rise. It's not an either or. It's not a choice between the individual and the greater good. The individual does his best because that is the way he can contribute towards the greater good. That's my point of view. Again, it's an interrelationship thing, that the way I see it. I can't see it as an either or thing.
I point out too that there's plenty of food. The main reason why people starve in this world has to do with political reasons.
Which is wrong, hey?
Ethiopia was starving. There was food being shipped by the ton. They were still starving because it was the middle of a civil war, and you just couldn't get the food to them. A lot of it has to do with logistics.
And because when
too.
they shipped the food to Ethiopia in the middle of the most severe drought in human history, the thing that they chose to ship to the starving children was powdered milk.
Ah.
Dude.
Oh, so you have to take into consideration too that in those regions they are ruled by warlords who enjoy freaking keeping their young high on dope and holding back food so that they can get these dope fiend teenagers to freaking carry rifles and kill for them.
Oh, that's easy, Roger. They kidnap them when they're 12 out of their mother's village.
Right.
That's not even...
Exactly, and these are the facts, though. You know what I mean? They kidnap them. They kidnap them. They get them high. They freaking make them kill for them.
Indeed.
And when these foods get brought into these countries, these warlords take possession of it, and they freaking are the ones who distribute it to those who do what they want them to do. So
which is what I come back to my thing again. The important thing, in my idea, in my mind, are the checks and balances. Like, why are those warlords out there without checks and balances? How do they get that amount of power? There's something wrong there. There's something where there isn't a balance.
That's most of human history. You're speaking from the perspective we have of, what became Western democracy.
Right here.
One of a better word, Western representative democracy, parliamentarianism, Magna Carta, the U.S. Bill of Rights, and the Enlightenment ideas of the worth of the individual, that the state should be subservient and give the individual freedom, not freedom to do things, but freedom from constraints to keep them from being the best person they can be. For 99% of human history, I would wager warlords is what you got. And this is, they are very archaic. It's very old. We are very new, and we're like a thin little bit of pond scum on top of the lake of history. And really, we're a lot more delicate than we think. The warlords come from great depth, and it would not take much for them to rear again. There was a great Star Trek episode. You guys might remember it, Mirror Mirror. It was about the alternate universe where there was like an evil Kirk and an evil Spock. Spock had a beard in the other universe. And Captain Kirk and Scotty and Bones and Uhura got switched in a transporter accident to the evil universe. And they're all dressed like their evil counterparts, so they had to pretend to be evil. It was the Earth Empire, none of this Federation of Planets bullcrap. And in the meantime, the evil Kirk had been sent over to the Enterprise. Well, all the time they're showing like our heroes figuring out how to get back to their own time, and they make it back, and they get, he gets back to the original ship, and he goes to Spock. It's like, well, how did you deal with my counterpart? Oh, we locked him up. It's like, well, how come? I mean, I was able to pretend to be my counterpart. I thought he's like, well, so you, as a civilized man, could become a barbarian if you needed to. He is a barbarian, could never act like a civilized man. And so it is very easy for our civilization It's right underneath us. It's what's supporting us. So yeah, warlordism unfortunately is what you get most of the time. I hate to say it. It's not a fun
What
plan.
you got. But we're different. We are not them.
Yeah. Oh no, we're not.
We could make a difference.
Okay.
We do. We are.
We could make a difference.
Okay, so let's move this on to Mark Edworthy so that we can get his talking points and we can get through what he has to say. So, your turn, Mark.
I've got no talking points per se, but just to reply back to what we were just talking about. The what you were just talking about was reminded me of a couple of things. The sort of secondary ability to vote reminds me a lot of the famous book and film Starship Troopers, where you are not, you cannot vote, you cannot be a citizen until you have actually joined the military and served a specific amount of time. Another point, something that dawned on me, there is a famous Margaret Thatcher speech in which she talked about there is no such thing as society. The concept of that everybody's out there to do their own thing, screw the rest of the population. And it also raises the idea of the trickle-down economy, which, as we've seen within recent times, doesn't actually function as well as it should.
Yeah.
Again, I've got no talking points per se, but yeah, just a couple of things to think about.
You know, there's a fascinating talk on UBI where he starts off quoting Margaret Thatcher when she said something about poverty being deficiency of character. And his whole talk says she was wrong. Poverty isn't a deficiency of character. Poverty is a deficiency of cash.
Yeah.
Chesterton.
Somebody cash. Chesterton.
Yeah, he said, the poor man is somebody that doesn't have any money. He says the poor man is somebody that doesn't have any money.
And that actually originates from frickin' French politics. You know, I've read that actually. That's a saying that because they had discussions about poverty because a lot of people would like to say that because you're poor you're lazy, and that's not the facts. There's nothing to back that up at all whatsoever. And I did agree with you when you said that. There are lazy people. Well,
yeah, some are rich and some are poor.
Yeah. I agree with you, man, on that. So, whose turn is it now to comment on what Mark had to say? Because I had to go to the bathroom. I had an emergency.
I jumped in and commented.
We all kind of got confused.
Okay, so it's.
I think it's Otto.
Wait, actually, it's my turn. It's my turn.
Yeah, there you go.
Because Mark's last, I'm first, so.
Yeah.
So, the one thing I do have to say when it comes to what Mark's been discussing before I left to go to the bathroom, you need to understand something about Mark. Everything he says is wrong when it comes to freaking England. Like he, okay. He freaking.
It's not like I live here one day.
He doesn't. He doesn't freaking know anything about his own country whatsoever.
Roger, we're so lucky we have you, Roger. So
I mean, no. me and Mark's had some really good conversations when it comes to a lot of the stuff that freaking we've been discussing here, and I'm really glad that we were able to cover this, and I'd like to discover more areas of English government, because the reason why I wanted to do the Labor Party was because a lot of people don't freaking understand how influential the Labor Party really is. Like, we just had Julian on here discussing things, and it relates to freaking England, and it relates to everything we've just been discussing, you know, with these, well, New Zealand, you know. It has to do with freaking the English Labor Party. I mean, believe it or not, it does. And the whole thing about constitutional governments too, it needs to be freaking brought out so that people understand what's really going on in these quote unquote constitutional governments. What you think is a constitutional government in reality isn't really a constitutional government. It's just a way for people to make the people in their countries feel better about their government, you know. You've been, what I call it is hoodwinked. Like, everybody looks at England and they say, oh, this is a freaking constitutional government, but it's not. England is the definition of imperial freaking government. It's got a king and a queen. Okay? It's probably one of the only countries left with a king and a queen. But
there's a few.
You know, so... there's a few, but that's what they are. They're imperial governments.
But the king and queen, or the monarch, doesn't have any, well, at least in the last 50 odd years, hasn't had any real sort of power when it comes to legislation. They obviously sign in legislation. But that's really just a rubber stamp exercise. That's to say, okay, I get a piece of legislation, my little signature done, give it back to the Parliament to enact it.
You see what I said? That's
what
I'm talking about. He knows absolutely nothing.
You see, we're the people who paint our bodies blue. I think
right.
You need to understand that we are the people who paint our bodies blue. The king is there because we put him there. Mm-hmm. We want him there. He suits us.
You guys
he
love
must
him.
Sit there and be the king.
You guys love him.
And if we need him, we'll pull him out, but we don't actually need him. But we know where he is. He's there, in that castle, and we have our eye on him.
Did you hear me?
I think it's important.
Hi.
As we saw with the last King Charles,
that's
one that can be removed if necessary.
But you need to understand, though. You guys love your king. You love him.
We don't.
Yes, you do.
Those people who love him, they love him, and we put up with them. But we're not them. You need to understand that they are just the great unwashed, and they come along with the society.
When Princess Diane freaking passed away, did you cry?
No, I didn't. But there was a lot of craziness. There was a lot of.
There's a lot of craziness.
Yes.
But you know, that comes along with the society. The crazies are there. The society is driven by the 20%. Woo!
Yeah, they decided they wanted me to freaking join their call.
Yeah, they want me as well.
Well, now, after me, it is freaking Bob Dub, I believe. You got to respond to what Mark said. Well, you've already said quite a bit, so
I've already said we're the guys who paint our bodies blue.
Now it's Otto's turn. Get him, Otto. Yeah. Get him, Otto. Don't let that English dude get away with talking smack. You heard him.
Oh, what do they know of England that only England know? I couldn't help thinking of the fact that New Zealand was having little conniptions over having a constitutional crisis over what they repealed or they repudiated the Westminster rigmarole there, and
Yeah.
whether they were actually a country or not, and like I always joke about, you still got the Union Jack on your flag, you've got the king on your money, and you've got a Governor General, who is your head of state and has just about as much power probably as the king has in England. He's basically the personal representative of the monarch. So, what are you worried about? I mean, coming from a country, and those of us who come from countries, and there are some of us here who took a more complete way of separating ourselves from Great Britain. Think it rather silly. I mean, we didn't have a constitutional crisis. We had a little war, and then we wrote a constitution. No crisis. It was just, the same for Rhodesia, India, Ireland, most of it anyway. They're still trying, and but yeah, it's like, I mean, it's just weird going through a kind of the most amazing mental gymnastics, like a limbo or something, trying to go under this bar and still we're completely independent, but we still have the king on our money. I mean, it's just so weird. I mean, and I know, and I probably said it before, but as Canadian, when I was talking about how the Governor General up there has to sign off on any wars, if they want to mobilize, he has to sign. They said, what if he wouldn't sign? He said, well, we pat him on the back, fly him off to London with a note saying, please don't send us any more. And so he signs everything. They don't dare. It would just never. The whole thing would fall apart at the slightest breath. But everyone's very, very careful not to breathe on it. You know where the king is. He's wrapped up in that box over there in the corner. No, don't walk too hard. He might fall off and get dented or something. We have to unwrap him very carefully, and because it's a very, very precarious sort of a system these days. I mean, yeah, I'm sure it has a lot of social prestige. I can't imagine. Like I say, I come from a state that on its state seal has the British crown being ground underfoot by the figure of liberty. It's right on our flag. They don't point it out too often. And the same people are avidly reading about what's happening with the royals in England. It's like, geez, it's weird. People in republics seem to have more fascination with royals than the people that actually live in kingdoms. It's and it's always the English. They never care about what's happening with Queen Beatrix or or King Carl Gustav in somewhere in Scandinavia or something. Or who do they got?
Who are they?
In Norway. And
there's more of a celebrity status sort of thing. Yeah, it's
Not
more
real
celebrity
kings.
status, and there's this fascination of those celebrities. Oh, you got to see what Beyonce is doing this week, or buy the latest copy of Vogue, or whatever.
It's weird. It's I'm thinking of the I read a lot of old literature and stuff, and the attention given to royals at one time, and there were scandals and things, but it was always it seemed like there was a different focus on what was going on, although they did do scandal mongering about foreign royals. You've probably seen some of the propaganda coins of the King of France doing very rude things, and then the French would make coins showing the King of England doing very rude things, sort of thing. It's not quite the same thing, but it's like early paparazzi, I guess, or early scandal sheets.
Interesting.
Was that before they started cutting off their heads?
They always cut their heads off. They
Yeah.
cut people's stuff constantly in the old days.
Well, I'm talking about the French though. I mean, when
The Reign of Terror. Oh,
yeah, was this before or after?
Way before.
Yeah,
Way before.
yeah. That
Actually, a lot afterwards as well. I can sort of foresee in my mind a few old newspaper cartoons about the break off or the splitting up of Europe with a cartoon figure of Napoleon and
the one Napoleon walking up these steps and then being kicked off again.
No, I think it was, if I remember, there was a pie or something, and you had various leaders just at the cutting of this pie as a representation of Europe.
Here's one I was looking for. Here's an image I was looking for earlier when you had mentioned about your current King Charles, which I thought was very apropos. Just took me a minute to remember. Oh, there we go. I found amazingly relevant cartoons in Punch.
We've got it. I'm posting it on the thing too, so.
That was Charles.
Yeah, I don't know for sure if you really want your name freaking posted above that. It's like in the freaking slideshow, it's got Idaho Excelsior like written right above it in white. I'm like that's something else. Charles II.
Yeah, that smug look on Charles II.
Yeah. So, are we good to go on all the conversation? Are you guys completely whipped and everything?
Totally whipped. Totally whipped.
You've come to the end of the year, probably.
Now, this is also the last part of the freaking stuff I was doing when it comes to the Labor Party. I want to also mention before we end that I only discuss the freaking Second International. If you guys want to find out more about communism and what it really is, you need to read up on the Third International, which will explain the freaking rise of the Soviet Union and where they split off from regular socialism and became what's popularly known as vulgar communism. So just be aware, we never discussed the Third International, which is important if you want to know how all this works out. So and I'm talking to you three, so freaking go in and read up on that, and then it'll kind of give you a finishing up. I don't really want to get too much into this shit too much because it's crazy.
Right.
You know. Next week, there are some things that I do want to mention when it comes to what we've gone over, and maybe bring them up as talking points. Kind of do, well, you guys know how I am. I like to go and rehash some of the stuff we've covered and just have basically a review of everything. I'd like to do that before we go further, if you guys agree with that. Would you like
I'm fine.
Okay.
Yeah, bring up a previous subjects, yeah.
Yeah, kind of like what we did last year. It's the same kind of thing, Mark. I mean, we did that too in last season, so we'll go over that, and then we can move forward on what we want to talk about. And like I said, if you guys want to bring up your own topics too, do it. So.
Cool. It's lovely.
So everybody, you guys want to give your information out? We'll start with freaking Bob Dub. Tell everybody about your socials and where they can find you.
Okay, I am on minds.com as Bob Dub. You can find some of my videos on Rumble. There's videos on Rumble and there's videos on YouTube. Rumble is Tiny Baby Kangaroo and YouTube is also Bob Dub. I'm on X as well as Bob Dub on Minds. So I just sort of float around. But if anybody wants to talk to me, I'll be on minds.com.
Okay, how about you?
Thank you, Roger.
You're welcome. How about you, Otto?
Oh, well, I'm on minds.com. I'm also on BitChute, and of course I have my navakavada.org. That's NAVAKAVADA. It's spelled just like it sounds.
Okay. How about you? What about you, Mark?
Again, I'm only solely on minds.com, so minds.com/medworthy. And yeah, that's really the only place.
All right. Now, Bob Dub, since you're the one that has more information about Julian, could you drop his information for him?
Sure. He is. I do not know what his social media is. I do know that you can find him on X. The Alternative Center podcast is on X and is on Rumble. I don't know what his social media is, but I do know that X and Rumble, the Alternative Center podcast.
Okay.
That's where you'll find his show.
Okay.
He also sells bullion. So he sells gold and silver. So if anybody is interested in investing, he's a great guy to get hold of, especially if you're a New Zealander.
There you go. That's actually a good plug because that's actually real life stuff that he does right there. If I can get him any kind of advertisement, then that's good to do. So, with that being said, I guess we can end the stream and be done with it because I'm pretty sure I've driven you guys crazy already and you're done with it.
It was fun. Thank you very, very much. Roger, have you dropped your details? Are you going to drop your
No, I mean,
details?
people
No.
can freaking search for me.
I know you.
I'm hardcore like that. I don't want people to freaking.
If they're watching, they're already here.
They're already here. That's the way it is.
They want to talk to you, Roger. They want to talk to you.
No, they don't.
They want to confront you one-on-one.
No, if they want to confront me one-on-one, it's usually to troll me and call me bad names. So usually. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and end this, and thank you guys for all being here. I really do appreciate it. This was a good stream, and I'd like to thank Julian for stopping by. And later on, if he watches this, let him know he's always welcome to show back up. And that is it.